Wrong room, wrong day, wrong man. Nobody heard him say it. The words were barely a breath spoken to the recycled air of a first-class cabin at JFK, swallowed by the hum of auxiliary power and the soft chime of a seatbelt sign. The man who said them didn't raise his voice. He never did. He simply looked at the orange bag sitting in his seat, looked at the woman who put it there, and made a quiet decision that would take everything she had ever valued and reduce it to rubble. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start with the bag. It was a Hermes Birkin in faux orange, the kind of object that announces its own price before anyone speaks. $5,000 of hand-stitched leather and status placed with deliberate ceremony onto the soft leather of Seat 1A on Flight 774 to London Heathrow. Not tucked, not resting, placed. The way you place a crown on a throne. The way you plant a flag in conquered territory. The woman who put it there had never once in her life questioned whether she belonged somewhere. She had been born into the certainty of belonging, raised in it, married further into it. She wore that certainty the way other people wore skin so completely that she had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the air you breathe until someone cuts off your supply. The man who came for that seat was different. He had spent his entire life being questioned. Every room he walked into, every desk he approached, every seat he reached for, had come with an invisible toll, a moment where someone looked at him and measured the distance between what they expected and what he was. He had paid that toll 1,000 times over, not with apology, not with anger, with something quieter and more dangerous than either. He paid it by building. By the time Marcus Webb walked down the jet bridge at Terminal 4 that humid Tuesday evening in July, he had built something worth $400 million. He had built it from a legal pad in a hallway, from a 3-sentence pitch in a lobby, from years of being told to try the back entrance and choosing instead to buy the building. He was the founder and CEO of Webb Meridian Group, a logistics firm that held supply chain contracts with 3 major North American airlines. His face had appeared on the cover of Forbes 11 days ago. The headline had called him the Quiet Titan. He was quiet. That much was accurate. What the headline missed was the precision behind the quiet, the way his stillness was not passivity but something closer to coiled architecture. He had learned young that the loudest person in any room was almost never the most powerful one. Power, real power, didn't announce itself. It simply was. And then when pushed, it acted. He was about to be pushed. Diana Hartwell was already in the cabin when Marcus stepped onto the plane. She was settled into Seat 1B with the efficiency of a woman who had done this 100 times. Heels off items spread the orange Birkin positioned on 1A with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once been told that seats were for people. She didn't look up when he arrived. She didn't need to. She had already decided somewhere in the wordless architecture of her assumptions that whoever was coming for that seat would be manageable, redirectable. The kind of person who, when presented with the mild inconvenience of her bag, would simply find somewhere else to be. She had been wrong before. She had never paid for it. Tonight, with cameras rising and a city watching and a world connected by an algorithm that eats injustice and spits out justice in real time, she was going to pay for every single time. Within 90 minutes of that plane failing to push back from Gate B-14, Diana Hartwell would be in handcuffs. A flight carrying 300 people would be canceled. A man she had dismissed in under 3 seconds would make one phone call that would begin the quiet, systematic dismantling of everything she had built her identity around. And Marcus Webb, the man she had looked through like a window, would finally sit in the seat he came for. But not before the story earned it. Not before we go back to the beginning. Not before we understand what was really sitting in that seat when the orange bag landed on it. Something older than money, older than status, older than any Birkin ever stitched. Dignity, and the question of who decides when it gets moved. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments below. And if stories about dignity, quiet strength, and people getting exactly what they deserve hit different for you, subscribe and hit that like button right now, because this one doesn't just hit hard, it hits true. Now, JFK, Terminal 4, 6:47 p.m. The sliding glass doors at the terminal entrance hissed open every 40 seconds, admitting fresh waves of travelers along with thick blasts of July heat that collided with the aggressive air conditioning of the departure hall in a battle neither side was winning. The terminal smelled of coffee that had been sitting too long, of sunscreen and stress, and the particular human urgency that only airports produce the feeling of time made physical of missing something that cannot be recovered. Flight 774 to London Heathrow was listed on the departure board in crisp white letters, Gate B14, on time. Boarding in 40 minutes. The gate area at B14 had the specific quality of first-class boarding in a busy terminal, a kind of contained pretension. A bubble where the noise was slightly lower and the carpet was slightly better, and the seats near the podium were slightly wider. A small group of passengers had already gathered, some standing with rolling bags, others settled with laptops and noise-canceling headphones pulled tight as armor. At the first-class check-in desk, a young woman named Caitlin Moore was working through the final pre-boarding verification with the precise, tired efficiency of someone 4 hours past her scheduled break. She was 26, with dark circles under sharp eyes, and she had been on her feet since noon. She had a gift for remembering faces, which in this job meant she also had a gift for absorbing the full spectrum of how people treated her. The dismissive, the demanding, the rare and startling occasions when someone looked her in the eye and asked how her shift was going. She was about to meet one of each. The gate area buzzed and shifted. A woman in a cream pantsuit was already moving toward the priority boarding lane, trailing a rolling bag carrying an orange Hermes tote that she held slightly away from her body, as though contact with lesser surfaces might be contagious. She did not look at Caitlin as she passed the desk. She looked at the jet bridge door as though willing it to open faster. Somewhere behind her, still far down the terminal corridor, a man in a charcoal suit was walking at a pace that was neither rushing nor slow. He moved with the easy authority of someone who had learned long ago that airports, like boardrooms, rewarded composure over urgency. He had a leather carry-on in one hand, no rolling bag. He bought a bottle of water from a vending machine near Gate B11, unscrewed the cap, took one sip, and continued walking. He had been awake for 31 hours. He had meetings in London in 11 hours worth $400 million. He wanted one thing from the next 6 hours: a seat. Silence. Sleep. The departure board clicked over. Gate B14, Flight 774, now boarding Group 1. Caitlin straightened behind her desk. She rolled her shoulders, took a breath, and looked up. The first person she saw was the woman in the cream pantsuit already pushing toward the jet bridge. The second person she saw coming down the corridor now was Marcus Webb. Her posture changed when she scanned his passport. Not fawning, not performing, just genuine, quiet recognition of someone who had earned her respect from a piece of paper alone. What happened next would change both their lives. "Mr. Webb," Caitlin said, and her voice dropped half a register into something that was not quite a whisper but was clearly not intended for the general boarding line. "It's an honor. We have 1A ready for you as requested. You're first in Group 1. Marcus looked at her name tag. He smiled, and it was a real smile, the kind that reached the eyes, unhurried and unperformative. "Thank you, Caitlin. Long shift." She blinked. People in 1A did not ask. "Since noon," she said, before she could decide whether to say it. "Almost there?" he said, taking the boarding pass she offered. "Get home safe." He moved away from the desk before she could respond, which was perhaps the most elegant part of the kindness, the not staying to receive the gratitude for it. Marcus Webb was 43 years old, 6'2", broad through the shoulders, with the kind of physical presence that a well-cut suit could enhance but not manufacture. He wore charcoal today, bespoke, because he had learned in his 30s that clothes were a language, and he preferred to speak it fluently rather than loudly. No pocket square, no tie. A Patek Philippe Aquanaut on his left wrist, steel and black. A watch that cost more than most cars in the Terminal 4 parking garage, worn with such absence of performance that 3 people had walked past him today without glancing at it. That was intentional. His leather carry-on was cognac brown, worn at the corners from actual use, not manufactured vintage distressing. He carried it in his left hand. His right hand held his notebook, a battered thick Leuchtturm 1917, with a broken elastic closure that he had replaced 3 times with a rubber band. The notebook went everywhere he went. It was the most honest thing about him. He moved through security with the practiced fluency of a man who had cleared 1,000 checkpoints. Laptop out, shoes off, jacket folded. He thanked the TSA agent by name, reading it from the badge. The agent looked slightly startled, then nodded. On the other side, Marcus did not go to the Centurion Lounge, though he had the card and the clearance and the membership. He did not want champagne and small talk and the particular theater of wealthy people performing relaxation at each other. He found a corner seat near the window at gate B12, 2 gates from his own, and sat down. He pulled out the notebook. He wrote 3 lines. The handwriting was small and careful. His phone buzzed. Adriana Cruz, his executive assistant. "London team is confirmed," she said before he could speak. She always said it before he could speak. "Boardroom at Webb Meridian London is ready for 9 a.m. signing. 11 attendees confirmed, 2 remote. The Hargreaves investors want to do a brief walkthrough of the supply projections before the documents are signed. I've prepared a 1-page summary. Should I send it?" "Send it," Marcus said. "Anything else?" A brief pause, not hesitation. Adriana never hesitated, but the particular pause of someone choosing how to sequence information. The Crestline acquisition documents were finalized this morning. Everything is recorded and confirmed. "Good. Do you want me to draft the announcement?" "No." "When?" "Not yet." He watched a plane push back from the gate outside the window. "Announcements invite questions, Adriana. Actions invite consequences. We act first." A moment of silence that he recognized as her writing this down. She wrote everything down. It was one of the reasons she was the best assistant he had ever had. "Safe flight," she said. "Thank you." He put the phone in his jacket pocket. He looked at the 3 lines in his notebook. He read them once, then closed the cover. 31 hours without sleep sat behind his eyes like pressure. His body knew the math of the next 24 hours better than his mind did. The signing, the handshakes, the investors who needed to feel confident, the journalists who would ask questions through intermediaries, the quiet dinner afterward where the real decisions would be discussed. He had done this before. He knew how to run on reserves. But first, he needed the seat. 1 seat. 6 hours. Darkness outside the window, and the engine hum, and nothing that required anything from him. He stood when the first boarding announcement came. He tucked the notebook back into the carry-on. He bought nothing from the newsstand, declined nothing from the gate agent offering upgrades to passengers who did not need them, and walked down the jet bridge at a pace that was neither urgent nor symbolic. He simply walked. The jet bridge smelled of jet fuel and stale conditioned air, and the faint specific staleness of 100 previous flights. The carpet was the deep blue of airline branding that looked expensive from a distance and showed scuffs up close. At the end of the bridge, the cabin door was open. A flight attendant stood at the threshold. Tomas Rivera, 34, with dark eyes and an even darker sense of humor that he kept carefully filed away during boarding. He had been doing this for 11 years. He had a gift for reading the temperature of a cabin in under 60 seconds, for knowing which passengers were going to be difficult before they opened their mouths, and for knowing which passengers, the quiet ones, the ones who said thank you without looking at you to see if you'd noticed the thank you were going to be the ones worth remembering. He looked at Marcus and nodded. "Mr. Webb, welcome aboard. Right this way." "Thank you, Tomas." Marcus stepped into the cabin, turned left into the first-class section, and stopped. The cabin was the older wide-body configuration, open suites rather than closed pods, spacious and hushed, lit in the warm amber of pre-flight lighting. Seat 1. A was on the left side window, first row. The leather was deep and cool-looking. The pillow was folded precisely at the corner, and on it, settled with the unhurried confidence of a territorial claim, sat a $5,000 orange bag. Marcus looked at the bag. He took one breath, a single, measured breath that the narration needs to sit inside for a moment, because in that breath was 31 hours of airports and time zones, and the weight of a $400 million signing, and somewhere underneath all of it, the older weight, the one he had been carrying since he was 19 years old, and someone looked at him and decided he belonged somewhere else. He let the breath out. He stepped forward. Diana Hartwell had been flying first class for 22 years. In those 22 years, she had developed a system for boarding that was as precise and unconscious as breathing. The Birkin positioned in the seat before her rolling bag went over head heels, off within 90 seconds, the personal reading device out the pre-flight champagne order placed with a tilt of the chin rather than a raised hand. She had boarded Flight 774 exactly 7 minutes before Marcus, which in her mental accounting meant she had arrived first and established prior claim not just to Seat 1B where her boarding pass directed her, but to the general territory of the first 2 rows, to the overhead bin, to the armrest, to the ambient piece of a cabin that should, in any sensible world, be organized around her comfort. She was 57 years old, though she spent considerable money and effort communicating 49. Her hair was platinum blonde, styled into a rigid helmet that did not move when she turned her head. Her pantsuit was cream, with a faint jacquard weave, expensive and slightly too tight across the shoulders in a way that spoke of either recent weight gain or old loyalty to a specific tailor. Her heels were Louboutin candy red on the sole. Her Birkin was Feu orange, the exact shade of a traffic warning placed on Seat 1A, with the unconscious imperial confidence of someone who had never not once been told that the seat was not for the bag. She was scrolling Instagram when Tomas helped her with the rolling bag. She did not look up while he lifted it. She said to the general airspace above her seat, "The ones with the metal buckle scratch. Don't put it near anything metal." Tomas said, "Of course," and lifted it with the practiced grace of a man who had heard variations of this sentence 10,000 times and had learned to let each one pass through him like water through open fingers. Diana's phone rang as she settled. She glanced at the screen. Her sister Carol, calling from Connecticut, and her face did something then that it did not do for flight attendants or gate agents or the people she passed in terminal corridors. It opened. She answered with warmth that was completely genuine. "Carol, yes, I'm on the plane. Tonight. I'll be in London by morning." A laugh, real and unguarded. "No, tell him I'll bring the good chocolates, not the airport kind." Another laugh. I know. Love you. I'll call from the hotel." She hung up, and the warmth that had been there was gone as cleanly as a light switching off. She returned to Instagram. She posted a photo of the champagne flute on the seat console, the orange Birkin visible in the corner of the frame, artfully included. Caption: Up, and away. Hashtag first class. Hashtag London bound. She added a location tag. The bag on Seat 1A was not a decision. That was the thing. It was not a choice she had made consciously, weighing the rights of the other ticketed passenger against the comfort of her property. It was simply what happened when Diana Hartwell sat down. Her things expanded into available space. They always had. They always would, until the space was no longer available, and someone came to explain the difference between available and belonging to them. She looked up when she heard movement at the cabin entrance. Later, she would not be able to articulate exactly what happened in her mind in the 2 seconds it took her to scan Marcus Webb from the entrance of the first-class cabin to the place where he now stood 3 feet from her seat. She would say in front of cameras, in front of a morning show host, in front of a deposition attorney, that she had been frightened, that his presence had felt aggressive, that she had sensed danger. What the cameras caught was different. What the cameras caught was a woman who looked at a tall, well-dressed black man with a Patek Philippe on his wrist and a Leuchtturm notebook visible in the top of his carry-on. A man who had not yet spoken a word, and whose face held nothing but the measured, bone-tired calm of someone who had been in too many airports for too many days and wanted nothing more than to sit down. And she looked at him the way a landowner looks at someone walking across a field they thought was theirs. Not frightened, proprietorial. The expression lasted less than a second, but it was there. And Sophia Reyes, the junior flight attendant, standing in the galley doorway, who was 22 years old and had grown up in a neighborhood where she had learned to read that particular expression before she learned to read English fluently, saw it and reached slowly and quietly for her phone. Tomas moved past Marcus toward the front galley. Marcus stepped forward. He stopped at seat 1A. He looked at the bag. He looked at Diana. He said quietly and without any of the performance that the moment might have invited, "Excuse me." Diana did not look up. She flicked her thumb across the Instagram screen. Marcus waited. The specific patience of a man who had been waiting for this kind of thing his entire life and had decided that the waiting itself would not defeat him. "Ma'am," he said. Diana exhaled. Long theatrical, the exhalation of a person interrupted from something of great importance by something of no importance whatsoever. She turned her head slowly. She looked at him. And in the aisle of a first-class cabin at JFK with 40 minutes until departure, and the July evening pressing orange against the oval windows with Tomas pretending to check inventory in the galley, and Sophia's phone camera blinking silently to life with 300 passengers settling into their seats behind a curtain that suddenly felt very thin, Diana Hartwell made the decision that would cost her everything. She looked at the bag. She looked at Marcus. She looked back at the bag. "It's a $5,000 bag," she said, as though this were a sentence that ended arguments. "It doesn't go on the floor." Marcus looked at the bag on seat 1A. He had the boarding pass in his jacket pocket. He had been awake for 31 hours. He had a $400 million deal in 11 hours on the other side of an ocean. He was standing in a first-class cabin he had paid full fare to be in, looking at a handbag sitting in his seat with the serene confidence of a passenger who had purchased their own ticket. He took one more breath, quiet, measured, the way you breathe before you say something that you have said 1,000 times before and will probably say 1,000 times more. "I understand the bag is valuable," he said. His voice was low conversational, the same voice he used in boardrooms when he wanted the room to lean in rather than brace. "I paid for seat 1A. Your bag did not. I'd like you to move it." Diana's expression shifted. Not dramatically, not a visible recoil, but a subtle rearrangement of her features in the direction of something colder. She looked at him the way someone looks at an object that has begun against all reasonable expectation to speak. "There's room in business class," she said, "or ask the attendant to find you something further back. I need the space." "I'm not sitting in business class," Marcus said. "I'm sitting in 1A. "You're being incredibly rude," Diana said, "for someone asking a favor." "I'm not asking a favor. I'm stating a fact." The words landed in the cabin air and stayed there. Not hostile, not raised, just present the way facts are present without needing anyone's permission to be true. Tomas materialized at Marcus's shoulder with the quiet speed of a man trained to arrive before a situation asked him to. He had been listening from the galley. He had also been hoping with the specific, exhausted hope of someone who had lost similar situations before that the woman would simply move the bag and the conversation would end here. "Ma'am?" Tomas said, his voice carrying the professional warmth of a man who genuinely liked people and was being tested on it. "I'm going to need to ask you to stow your personal items in the overhead bin or under the seat in front of you. Mr. Webb is the ticketed passenger for 1A. Diana looked at Tomas. She looked at him for a long moment in the way powerful people sometimes look at service professionals, as though his words had arrived in a language she technically spoke but chose not to engage with. "I fly this airline 40 times a year," she said. "My husband's company is one of your top corporate accounts. I would think that entitles me to basic accommodation." "It entitles you to excellent service in your assigned seat," Tomas said. "Which is 1B. Diana's eyes narrowed. She turned back to Marcus, and this time the pretense of inconvenient civility was thinner, the good social lacquer wearing at the edges to show what was underneath. "He came at me," she said to Tomas, but loud enough to reach the second and third rows. "He walked in here and immediately started making threats." Marcus had not moved. He had not raised his hands. He had not stepped forward. He stood in the aisle with his carry-on in his left hand and his right hand empty. And he looked at the bag, and he looked at Diana, and he said nothing because the silence was doing better work than any sentence he could have constructed. In row 3, a man named Noah Briggs, 31, a travel vlogger from Austin who had 340,000 YouTube subscribers and a phone that he considered a professional tool, had been watching this exchange since Marcus first spoke. He had been in first class 17 times and had seen bag disputes before. He had never seen one quite like this. There was something in the quality of the stillness from the man in the aisle that Noah, who had an instinct for stories, recognized as significant. He raised his phone. The red dot blinked on. He said nothing. He simply began recording. In the galley doorway, Sophia Reyes stood with her back against the wall and her phone held low and angled upward. She had been recording for 4 minutes. She noted the time on the screen. 6:59 p.m. Diana sensed the phones. She did not see them, but she felt them the way people who have spent their lives performing for audiences develop a peripheral awareness of attention. Her voice adjusted, softened at the edges, took on the particular tremor of grievance. "I don't feel comfortable," she said. "He's making me uncomfortable. He walked onto this plane, and the moment he saw me, the energy was just—" She gestured vaguely. "I'm a woman traveling alone. I have a right to feel safe." Marcus looked at her for one long, unblinking moment. "Wrong room," he said very quietly. So quietly that later, when Noah's footage was slowed and the audio was boosted, commenters would argue for 3 days about whether he had said it at all. "Wrong day. Wrong man." Diana blinked. "Excuse me." He didn't repeat it. He turned to Tomas. "I'd like the captain, please." Tomas keyed his headset. Margaret Ellis, 64 years old, retired professor of economics from the University of Michigan, sitting in seat 3A with a hardback. She had stopped reading 7 minutes ago, leaned forward slightly. She had short silver hair and reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, and the kind of calm that comes from spending a long career watching rooms full of people choose between the comfortable lie and the inconvenient truth. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the bag. She looked at Diana. She set her book down on her tray table. She did not speak. Not yet. But she set her book down with the particular deliberateness of a woman who had decided something. Diana was still talking. She was talking to Tomas, to the general cabin, to the ambient witnesses of a plane filling up with people who were finding their seats and immediately going still as they absorbed the specific atmospheric pressure of an unresolved conflict. "This is harassment," Diana said. "I want this person removed. I want to speak to management. I have been a loyal customer for over 2 decades, and I am being treated like ma'am. Tomas had reached the end of a very long professional patience and had arrived somewhere beyond it that was not anger, but was absolute and final. You have been given 3 direct instructions to move your property from a ticketed passenger seat. I am formally informing you that failure to comply with crew member instructions is a violation of federal aviation regulations. This is your final warning before I request law enforcement assistance. Diana stared at him. The cabin had gone genuinely quiet now. Not the polite, averting quiet of people pretending not to hear something. The held breath quiet of people who had stopped pretending. Marcus stood in the aisle, carry-on in hand, waiting. Not performing patience. Not demonstrating restraint for an audience. Simply waiting the way a mountain waits, having learned long ago that it does not need to justify its presence to weather. Sophia's phone camera captured his face in profile. Later, that frame, that single still image extracted from the video, would be printed on signs and t-shirts and shared in caption contests and used in op-eds about a dozen different things. But what the image actually showed when you looked at it without the context of the argument was a man who was very tired and wanted very much to sit down. That was all. That was enough. "Move the bag," Marcus said, "or I'll move it myself." Diana gasped. Her hand went to her collarbone. "If you touch my property," she said, "that is assault. I will press charges. I will have you arrested." "Moving a bag from a seat is not assault," Marcus said. "Sitting in someone else's seat without permission is theft of service. I'll give you one more opportunity to solve this simply." The orange Birkin sat between them like a verdict waiting to be read. A second flight attendant appeared from the business class section. A young man named Carter Reeves, who had been dispatched by Tomas via headset and who arrived with the uncertain energy of someone who had received a briefing but had not yet seen the thing being briefed about. He took one look at the configuration, the bag on the seat, the tall, still man in the aisle, the woman with her arms crossed and her chin elevated, and he aligned himself beside Tomas with the instinct of someone choosing a side without quite knowing they were choosing. "What seems to be the difficulty?" Carter asked, which was the question he had been trained to ask, and which in this specific context landed with the faint absurdity of asking someone standing in a burning room how the temperature was. "There is no difficulty," Diana said to Carter, ignoring Tomas entirely. "There is a man who has been behaving aggressively toward me since he boarded, and a crew member who is taking his side instead of protecting a paying passenger." Carter looked at Tomas. Tomas kept his face neutral with the practiced effort of a man who had been doing this for 11 years, and who had learned that in these moments the most important thing was not to give the other person your emotion to use as a weapon. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, because he had gotten her name from the manifest. "I have asked you 3 times to move your personal bag from seat 1A, which is Mr. Webb's assigned seat. He is standing in the aisle because you are occupying his place. That is the entirety of the situation." Diana pivoted to Carter. "He threatened to touch my property." "I said I would move it," Marcus said, "if she would not. That is not a threat. That is a statement of intended action to retrieve access to a seat I have paid for." Carter looked between them. Diana pressed her advantage with the precision of someone who had spent decades reading rooms and understood that the presence of a second authority figure created an opportunity for contradiction. "He's had an aggressive energy from the moment he walked on this plane," she said, her voice dropping into the register of reasoned concern, lower now, calmer, performatively reasonable. "I don't know this man. He's standing over me in my seat. I am a woman alone on an international flight, and I am asking for your help." Carter, to his credit, looked at Tomas rather than at Diana. Tomas gave him the smallest, most controlled shake of his head. "Your seat, Mrs. Hartwell," Carter said carefully, "is 1B." Diana turned to him fully. The reasoned concern evaporated. "You," she said, and her voice had sharpened into something that had edges, "are a waiter with wings. Do not tell me what my seat is." The cabin heard it. Not all of it, but enough of it. The phrase "waiter with wings" delivered in the specific register of contempt that requires no volume to carry reached row 3, where Margaret Ellis sat with her book face down on the tray table and her hands folded in her lap. It reached row 4, where a couple was no longer looking at their phones. It reached Noah Briggs's camera, which was still recording the sound quality surprisingly clean given the ambient engine noise. Tomas did not change his expression. He had been called things in 11 years that made waiter with wings sound like a compliment. He had learned to let words like that pass through him. But the letting through was costing him something tonight, and the cost was visible in the small tightening around his jaw there, and gone, in a second, the way a candle flickers in a draft. He keyed his headset, spoke quietly, professionally. "Captain Holt to first class. We have a situation requiring your presence." Diana heard the word captain, and her entire posture changed. She straightened. Her chin came down from its elevated position. Her voice shifted again this time into a register that Marcus had been watching shift through 4 or 5 configurations in the last 10 minutes and had recognized with a tired familiarity. Performance. All the way down. "Thank goodness," she said to nobody specifically. "Someone reasonable." Marcus looked at her, not with anger. Not with the heat of someone who had been insulted and was building toward response. With something that was harder to describe and harder to withstand, a kind of precise, sober recognition of exactly what he was looking at, and an absence of surprise about it that was itself its own kind of statement. "You should stop talking now," he said. Diana turned to him. "Excuse me." "Not because I'm threatening you," he said. "Because the more you say, the worse this gets. For you." "Is that a threat?" Diana said. "It's an observation." Noah Briggs from row 3 did not look up from his screen, but spoke at a volume calibrated precisely to be audible without being directly confrontational. "For what it's worth," he said to nobody in particular but to everyone present. "He hasn't raised his voice once since he boarded." Diana turned to look at him. She saw the phone. Her eyes moved and found Sophia near the galley curtain, and found the couple in row 4 with their own phones angled upward, and found Margaret Ellis sitting with the still attention of someone who had decided to be a witness. The temperature of the cabin was changing. Diana could feel it. She had performed for rooms before. She understood the physics of an audience that had decided how it felt. She shifted strategy with the speed of someone who had been working a room long enough to know when to change the story. "I am a woman," she said, pitching her voice now to the wider cabin. "Traveling alone. I am being surrounded by crew members, and this man and I am frightened. If this were happening to any of you, if a strange man stood over you in your seat and crew members refused to help you—" "He's standing in the aisle," Margaret Ellis said. Diana blinked. Margaret Ellis did not raise her voice. She did not get up. She simply looked at Diana over her reading glasses with the patient, clarifying precision of a woman who had spent 30 years explaining complicated things to rooms that would rather believe simple ones. "He has been standing in the aisle since he arrived. You are in his seat. The crew has asked you to move your bag 3 times. I've been watching since the beginning, and the only thing I've seen that resembles aggression is the word you used to describe the young man who helped you with your luggage." Diana stared at her. "Waiter with wings," Margaret said. "I believe that was the phrase." The cabin was very quiet. Marcus looked at Tomas. Tomas looked at Marcus with an expression that in another setting might have accompanied a slow exhale of relief. He had been standing in this aisle, professionally calm, absorbing all of it for 11 minutes. 11 minutes of being told he was a waiter a side-taker, a glorified servant, and he had held the line. Not because he was required to by policy, because something in him, some deeply personal understanding of what was at stake in this specific configuration of power and who was being asked to move, had told him to hold. He had held. 3 years ago, a similar passenger in a similar cabin had screamed at him until he had backed down and moved a different passenger to accommodate her demand. He had thought about that passenger for 3 years. He did not know her name. He knew she had been right, and he had failed her. Not tonight. "Captain Holt is on his way," Tomas said. His voice was steady. His hands were steady. "Please remain in your seats." He did not look at Diana when he said it. He looked at Marcus, who nodded once, very slightly. The nod of one person to another that means I see what you're doing, and I see what it costs, and it matters. Sophia, behind the galley curtain, had been recording for 14 minutes and 37 seconds. She noted the time. The narration pauses here. Not because the action in the cabin has stopped, but because to understand what was happening in Marcus Webb's chest as he stood in that aisle, you need to go back 24 years. You need to go to a different room, a different doorway, a different version of the same moment that had been following him across his entire life. He was 19 years old. Baltimore, late September. The morning air was cool and the city was yellow with early fall light, and Marcus Webb had been awake since 4:30 preparing for the most important day of his life so far. He had been accepted into a logistics internship at Hartley Cargo Solutions, a mid-size shipping and supply company that most people had never heard of, and that Marcus had been researching for 8 months, memorizing their shipping routes, studying their inefficiencies, teaching himself supply chain modeling from a library book he had renewed 6 times. He had one good shirt. He had ironed it at 5 a.m. with the iron his mother kept on a shelf above the washing machine. He arrived at the office building at 8:45 for a 9 o'clock meeting. The lobby was marble and chrome. There was a reception desk in the center with a woman behind it who had a telephone headset on and was speaking to someone when Marcus entered. She looked up. She looked at him. The expression that crossed her face was not unkind. It was not hostile. It was simply automatic, a reflex so ingrained that she was probably not aware of it happening the same way you are not aware of flinching from a sound until after your body has already done it. "Deliveries are around back," she said, turning back to her call before he could respond. Marcus stopped. He had heard variations of this sentence before. He knew the physics of it, how it moved through the air and landed, and what it expected you to do next. He also knew that the internship director, a woman named Patricia Sawyer, was expecting him at this desk at 9 o'clock. "I have a meeting," he said, "with Patricia Sawyer. My name is Marcus Webb." The receptionist looked at him again. She pressed a button on the phone console. "Patricia, I have someone at the front desk who says he has a 9 o'clock. A pause. Then to Marcus. "She says she's on a call. You can have a seat." A man came through a glass door from the back offices. He was in his 40s in a shirt with the sleeves rolled up, carrying a coffee mug with the company logo. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the receptionist. He said not to Marcus, but to the receptionist in the specific way that people sometimes speak about a person who is present as though they are not. "This the Johnson kid." Marcus was not the Johnson kid. He had no idea who the Johnson kid was. He understood with the bone-deep comprehension of a young man who had been navigating rooms like this his entire life that it did not matter. He had already been categorized, already been placed. The man looked at Marcus and said with a not unkind awkwardness that was somehow worse than hostility would have been, "You can wait in the hallway." Marcus waited in the hallway for 40 minutes. He sat on a bench beside a fire extinguisher and a corkboard with a lost and found notice pinned to it. He did not leave. He did not take out his phone to look busy. He pulled a legal pad from his bag and he wrote. He wrote routes, shipping routes. He had memorized Hartley's published distribution network from their company filings and a trade journal article from 2 years ago, and he had noticed 3 redundancies that added 7 days of transit time and, by his calculation, approximately $340,000 in annual unnecessary cost. He sketched an alternative model. He refined it. He worked on it for 38 minutes while the hallway was empty around him. Patricia Sawyer found him there. She was horrified. She apologized in this way people apologize when they are ashamed and have no adequate words for it. She upgraded his position on the spot from file assistant to junior logistics analyst, which was not a position that had existed before that morning. He showed her the legal pad. She stared at it for a long time. "How long were you out here?" she asked. 40 minutes, he said. "And you did this in 40 minutes? "I had the time," he said. That model, refined and expanded over the following 3 years, became the core routing algorithm of Web Meridian Group. It was now used in supply chain optimization by 2 of the 3 airlines on whose planes Marcus Webb flew when he needed to be somewhere fast. The hallway had not stopped him. It had built him. He had stopped waiting in hallways a long time ago. Back in the cabin of Flight 774, Diana Hartwell was still talking. The orange Birkin bag was still in seat 1A. Captain Holt's footsteps were coming down the jet bridge, and Marcus Webb stood in the aisle and blinked once, feeling the familiar weight of the moment settle on to him with the tired recognition of something that never quite surprised him no matter how many times it arrived. He knew this script. He had decided years ago how it ended. Diana Hartwell was running out of strategies. She had tried dismissal inconvenience, corporate leverage, victimhood, and an appeal to the wider cabin. Each had failed to produce the outcome she required, which was Marcus Webb leaving the aisle and her bag remaining in seat 1A. Each failure had moved the room slightly further from her, the way a tide pulls back from the shore in increments that feel small until you look down and see that the water is gone. She was not a stupid woman. She was, in fact, quite perceptive about people had been her entire life able to read a room's temperature, calibrate her performance, adjust her approach. What she had never learned to do because the world had never required it of her was to lose gracefully or to lose at all. The perception that had served her in comfortable rooms was now an instrument turned against her because she could feel the cabin's sympathy withdrawing with every sentence she spoke, and she did not know how to stop speaking. "People like him," she said. She said it in a voice that was technically moderate, directed at Carter Reeves, who was standing to her left, aimed at him, but loud enough for the first 4 rows. The grammar of the sentence pointed toward Marcus, who was standing 2 feet away and heard every syllable. People like him think that because they wave a corporate card and stand there looking important, they can just... She stopped. Not because she had finished the sentence, because the cabin had gone completely silent. Not the held-breath silence of earlier, the kind where people are waiting to see what happens next. A different silence. The kind that falls when something undeniable has been said in a public space, and the air itself needs a moment to decide what to do with it. The couple in row 4 had stopped mid-movement, a water bottle halfway to a mouth, still there. Noah Briggs had stopped even pretending to scroll. His phone was fully raised now, openly recording his expression, the expression of someone who knows they have just captured something significant and is holding very still so as not to disturb it. Margaret Ellis unfolded her hands in her lap and placed them flat on the tray table. She said in the careful voice of someone making a formal record, "I've been flying first class for 30 years. In those 30 years, I have never once seen a ticketed passenger's seat treated as luggage storage and considered normal. Not once." She paused. "I have, however, seen people told they don't fit using different words. The words change, the sentence doesn't." Diana turned to her. Her face was cycling through expressions too fast for any single one to settle. "I was not implying anything." "You said people like him," Margaret said. "In a first-class cabin, to a man who is standing in the aisle because your bag is in his seat. What precisely were you implying?" I was talking about his behavior. He hasn't raised his voice? Noah said from row 3, not looking up from his phone screen. He hasn't made a threatening gesture. He's been standing in the aisle asking for his seat. That is his entire behavior so far. The live chat agrees, said Noah, glancing at the numbers climbing in the corner of his screen. 400 people watching this right now. The comments are very clear about what they're seeing. Diana looked at the phones. She saw for the first time with full clarity the number of recording devices that had risen around her. Not a few, not the couple she had noticed earlier, but a distributed web of witnesses. Every one of them connected to a network she could not access or control or redirect. The situation she had believed she was managing had not been manageable for some time. Sophia stepped out from behind the galley curtain. She did not say anything. She simply stepped forward into the visible space of the cabin and stood. She was 22 years old, and her hands were not entirely steady, but her face was, and she looked at Marcus and gave him a small nod that said, "Without language, I've had this running since you arrived." Every word, every second. Marcus looked at her, the smallest acknowledgement. He filed her name away. "You should know," he said to the cabin, and specifically to Diana, in the measured tone of someone reading aloud from a document that has already been signed, "that everything in this cabin has been recorded by multiple devices from the moment I arrived, audio and video. If you would like to continue this conversation, you should do so with that understanding." Diana looked at him. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm informing you," Marcus said. "There's a difference." The distinction landed in the cabin with the precision of a scalpel. Carter Reeves, the second attendant, had taken half a step back without noticing. The couple in row 4 had moved their chairs slightly toward the window. The woman who had been in the boarding line behind Marcus, now seated in row 2, leaned across to her companion and whispered something, and her companion nodded, and they both looked at Diana with an expression that was not hostile but was very clear. They had decided. The cabin had decided. Diana was still talking. Her voice was rising again, circling back through the same arguments with increasing desperation: the husband's corporate account, her platinum status, the crew's unfairness, the aggression she had experienced, the discomfort she was being forced to endure. The words were the same words, but they had a different quality now, the quality of something that has lost its structural integrity and is still standing only through momentum. Marcus had stopped listening to the words. He was watching her eyes. He had seen this before, too. Not here, not in this cabin, but in other rooms, in boardrooms and lobbies and courthouse corridors, the specific moment when a person who has been protected by a certain kind of certainty starts to understand that the protection has an edge, and they have found it. She had not believed until 30 seconds ago that there was any version of this story in which she was not the injured party. She had entered the cabin confident of the narrative. She was starting to feel the narrative's ground shift under her feet. Marcus looked at Tomas. Tomas looked back at him. Neither of them spoke. From the jet bridge came the sound of a different kind of footstep. Not the quiet rubber soles of crew. Something heavier, more deliberate. Captain Douglas Holt was coming. Captain Douglas Holt was 54 years old, silver-haired, and built like a man who had flown through actual emergencies, and therefore had very little patience left for manufactured ones. He had 22,000 flight hours. He had landed a wide-body aircraft with a hydraulic failure in Frankfurt, had diverted through a North Atlantic storm cell that air traffic control had initially told him was manageable, and had once memorably talked a panic-stricken passenger out of trying to open a cabin door at 35,000 feet through 40 minutes of uninterrupted calm narration. He was not a man who was impressed by a scene. He stepped into the first-class cabin, adjusted his hat, and took in the configuration in approximately 4 seconds. Bag on seat, man standing in aisle, flight attendants positioned with the specific posture of people who have already tried and need backup. Woman in 1B with her arms crossed and an expression that he had seen on a certain kind of passenger and had learned from experience to handle like unexploded ordnance, carefully, specifically, with no sudden movements and no ambiguity. "What is the situation here?" he said. His voice did not boom. It carried the difference between a megaphone and a resonating chamber. The authority came from the source and not the volume. Diana transformed instantly. The shift was so complete that several passengers would mention it later in their accounts, the way her entire architecture rearranged itself at the sight of the uniform, the raised chin dropping the crossed arms, opening the voice which had been sharp and declarative, becoming soft and fluttery and practiced. "Oh, thank goodness," she said, one hand going to her chest. "Captain, I've been so frightened." This man came on board and immediately became aggressive, and the crew has been taking his side rather than helping me. And I have just been sitting here. I've been a platinum member for 15 years. I just want to get to London. Captain Holt looked at Tomas. Tomas gave him the crisp 30-second summary. Bag on seat. 3 requests to move it. Refusal each time. Escalating behavior from the passenger in 1B. Slurs directed at crew. Allegations of threat against the passenger in the aisle with no observed support in the cabin. Holt looked at Marcus. "Is this your assigned seat, sir?" "It is," Marcus said. Holt looked at the bag on the seat. He looked at Diana. "Ma'am," he said with the flat, non-negotiable clarity of a man who flies aircraft through actual weather. "On my aircraft, passengers sit in seats and luggage goes in the overhead compartment or under the seat in front of you. I am asking you once to move your property. After that, I will have law enforcement remove it, and then I will have them assess whether it is safe to have you on this aircraft." Diana stared at him. The damsel evaporated. What replaced it was the real Diana Hartwell, the one underneath the performance, and it was not, as the cabin now witnessed, the frightened woman she had been describing. It was something that had never once been told no by anyone, it considered worth obeying, and it was furious. "You cannot speak to me like this," she said, her voice climbing. "My husband has a direct relationship with your senior VP. Do you have any idea what one phone call from Robert Caldwell, from Paul Hartwell, from my husband can do to your—" "10 seconds," Captain Holt said. "I have rights." Diana continued, the volume rising, the composure dissolving in real time. "I have been a loyal passenger for 15 years. I have spent more money on this airline than most of your crew makes in a year. I will have this investigated. I will have you investigated. I will—" "5 seconds," Captain Holt said. Diana's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Then she reached down, grabbed the orange Birkin, and threw it. Not placed it. Not moved it. Threw it. Into the aisle, a dramatic heave that landed the bag on the carpet with a heavy, hollow thud. The sound of $5,000 of leather and metal hardware meeting the floor with the full force of a woman who had wanted to win and was now at minimum going to make sure everyone understood what losing cost her. "There," she said, standing, her voice cracking across the upper frequency of rage. "There it is, on the dirty floor, $5,000 on an airline carpet. I hope you are all satisfied. I hope this is what you wanted." The cabin was absolutely still. She looked at Marcus. "Sit down," she said. "Take your precious seat. I hope you choke on the complimentary peanuts." Marcus looked at Captain Holt. Captain Holt looked at Marcus. Between them passed the brief, wordless communication of 2 people who have both, in their different ways, been in enough rooms to recognize when something has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. "Captain," Marcus said quietly, "I have said this without any performance intended. I do not feel comfortable sitting beside this passenger for a 7-hour transatlantic flight. She is unpredictable, and I am genuinely uncertain what the next 7 hours would look like." "I agree completely," said Margaret Ellis from row 3 in the tone of a woman delivering a verdict she has considered carefully and will not be revising. 3 hands went up in the rows behind her. Not dramatically. Just up. Diana looked around. She looked at the hands. She looked at the phones. She looked at Noah Briggs, who was still recording, who had now been recording for 19 minutes, and whose live chat had climbed past 700 viewers. She looked at Sophia near the galley, whose phone was still held steady and low. She looked at Captain Holt, who had already reached for the interphone on the wall. For the first time in the entire encounter, Diana Hartwell went quiet. It lasted 3 seconds. Then she buckled her seatbelt. "Law enforcement to Gate B14 first-class cabin," Captain Holt said into the interphone. His voice was the voice of a man filing a report, factual, clean, stripped of drama, because the situation had manufactured enough without his contribution. "Disruptive passenger, denial of boarding required." Diana's jaw dropped. "What?" Her voice was small for the first time. "No. I moved the bag. You said move the bag. I moved it." "It is no longer about the bag," Captain Holt said with the tone of a man closing a chapter. "It is about the safety of my crew and my passengers. You have insulted my staff. You have made threatening statements. You have physically disrupted the boarding process. You are deplaning." "I moved the bag," Diana repeated, and there was something genuinely disoriented in her voice now, as though the rules she had understood to govern this situation had been swapped out for different rules without her consent. "Ma'am," Captain Holt said, "please unbuckle your seatbelt." "I am not moving," Diana said, and she gripped the armrests with both hands, the orange bag abandoned on the floor of the aisle, her heels digging into the carpet, and she stared straight ahead at the bulkhead with the fixed expression of someone who has decided that if they do not acknowledge a thing, it does not exist. 2 Port Authority officers arrived at the cabin door in under 4 minutes. They were professional and efficient, and entirely unimpressed by anything they found, having dealt with resistant passengers before, and having learned that the resistance almost never changed the outcome. "Ma'am," the first officer said. He was calm, measured, the professional cousin of Captain Holt's authority. "I need you to come with us." "I am not going anywhere," Diana said, still staring at the bulkhead. "This is discrimination. You are removing me because I am a woman. You are taking his side because he is a man. I know my rights." "You are being removed because you have refused direct crew instructions multiple times and are disrupting a commercial flight," the officer said. "Please come with us now." "No." The officer looked at his colleague looked back. They had the specific patience of people for whom this was a Tuesday. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time to come with us voluntarily." "No." They reached for her gently but firmly, one on each side. Diana began to fight. Not dramatically, not violently, but with the determined physical resistance of someone who has decided that her body is the last argument she has left. She pulled against their grip. Her hair, the rigid platinum helmet, had begun to loosen. Her cream pantsuit was pulling at the shoulders. She kicked out with both legs. One heel connected with the officer's shin. It was not a hard impact. It was not by any objective measure a dangerous blow, but it was contact. Physical contact, with a law enforcement officer, in the act of resisting lawful removal from an aircraft. The first officer said very quietly and without any particular emotion, "That is assault on a police officer." He produced the handcuffs. Diana said in a voice that had finally fully lost its shape, No, wait, I'll go voluntarily. There's no need for—" But the officer had already made his determination, and his determination was that a person who kicks an officer after being told 3 times to comply does not get the option of voluntary departure. The removal took 3.5 minutes. Marcus stepped back into the galley to give the crew space. He stood beside Sophia, who had finally stopped recording, and he watched. Not with satisfaction, not with any visible emotion at all. He watched the way you watch something complicated resolve itself with the attention it deserves, and without the performance the moment might invite. Diana screamed the whole way down the aisle. Her hair was fully loose now, falling across her face. Her suit was rumpled, the jacket half off one shoulder. She grabbed at armrests, at overhead bins, at anything available, not to stop herself, but because her hands needed somewhere to be needed, to grip something, having spent the last hour gripping authority, and found it gone. As she was pulled past Marcus, she turned her head. Their eyes met. She was not crying. She was beyond crying. Her eyes were wild with a specific kind of fury that comes from losing in public the thing you never believed you could lose. "You'll pay for this," she said. "I'll sue you. I'll sue all of you. Do you have any idea who my husband is?" "You don't know who I am." Marcus looked at her for a moment. His voice, when he spoke, was very quiet. "I know exactly who you are," he said. "That's not a difficult question." She was gone before she could respond. The cabin was silent for 4 seconds. Then someone in row 6 started clapping tentatively one pair of hands in the hush. Then another. Then Margaret Ellis from row 3 clapped twice, precisely not triumphant, but acknowledging something that needed acknowledging. Then the rest of the cabin joined, not in celebration, but in the collective exhale of people who had been holding their breath. Marcus walked back to seat 1A. He set his carry-on in the overhead bin. He sat down. The leather was cool and deep. He picked up the orange bag from the floor of the aisle and handed it to Tomas. "I imagine they'll need that," he said. "Thank you, Mr. Webb," Tomas said. Marcus nodded. He picked up the menu card from the console. He put it back down. He looked out the window. The tarmac was lit in the yellow-gray of a late summer evening, the ground crew moving around the aircraft with the specific, purposeful randomness of their work. Marcus watched them for a moment, then looked at his watch. He waited. 10 minutes. 15. The engines did not spin. The jet bridge did not retract. The ground crew outside his window were moving faster now, with the quality of urgency that ground crew are not supposed to have at a gate. The PA system crackled. Captain Holt's voice was different now, the command tone replaced by the specific heavy flatness of a man delivering news he cannot improve. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Holt. I'm very sorry to inform you that due to the delay caused by the passenger removal and the resulting impact on our crew duty hours under federal aviation regulations, Flight 774 is canceled. All passengers please deplane and proceed to the terminal for rebooking assistance." The cabin erupted, canceled. Because of her. A man's voice from business class. "Thanks a lot, buddy." He was talking to Marcus. "If you'd just sat somewhere else, none of this happens. Now 300 people are stranded because you had to have your exact seat." Marcus said nothing. He stood. He took his carry-on from the overhead bin. He walked up the aisle with his head level and his face composed, and the specific, long-practiced dignity of a man who has been blamed for the consequences of other people's choices before and has learned that responding to it in the moment changes nothing. In the terminal, he found the corner by the window. He took out his phone. Terminal 4 at JFK had been a manageable kind of chaos before the cancellation. It became something else entirely when 300 passengers of Flight 774 came through the doors in a wave of frustration and rolling bags, all of them looking for the customer service desk and finding a line that was already 60 people deep. The smell of stale coffee had been joined by the smell of frustration, which has its own specific olfactory quality, a sharpening of the air that comes from a large number of people in a confined space who all feel justifiably that something has been taken from them. Children were crying in the way children cry in airports, high and sustained. A man was already on his phone with a lawyer. A woman in business class was informing her companion that she was going to write an 800-word review and publish it somewhere that mattered. At the center of this, Diana Hartwell was holding court. She had been released by the Port Authority with a desk appearance ticket for the misdemeanor of having kicked an officer. The officers had not wanted to do the full booking paperwork at 7:30 on a Friday evening, and had made the pragmatic decision of a department that had exactly this kind of call 5 times a week process her later release her now. Diana, still disheveled hair, partially loose suit, wrinkled in ways that would have horrified her 2 hours ago, had taken the ticket and walked back into Terminal 4 with the expression of someone who had been martyred and intended to tell everyone about it. She had found 6 disgruntled passengers within 4 minutes. She had an instinct for disgruntled passengers, could identify them the way a conductor identifies the musicians who are slightly out of tune, and she had positioned herself at the edge of the customer service line and begun, in a voice calibrated to carry without seeming to try to narrate what had happened. "I told them," Diana was saying as Marcus came through the jet bridge doors. "I told them from the beginning that something was wrong. That man, that aggressive, entitled man, came onto that plane and immediately started making threats, and instead of protecting a paying passenger, the crew decided to make him their pet cause. And now look at all of you stuck here. Your plans ruined, your nights gone because the crew decided their feelings about one passenger's luggage was worth all of this." She had found the true grievance. That was her actual skill, not fabricating the story, but grafting it onto something real. The canceled flight was real. The ruined plans were real. The 300 people who were going to miss connections and hotel bookings and meetings were real. She had simply attached her name to those real things as their cause and attached Marcus's name to her name. She saw him emerge from the jet bridge. She pointed. "There he is," she said loudly to the group of 6 who had become 12. "That is the man who just cost you your evening. That is the man who refused every reasonable request and escalated a simple bag dispute into a federal incident." A few people, not many, but enough, looked at Marcus with the redirected frustration of people who needed somewhere to put it. Someone booed. Marcus heard it. He kept walking. He did not look at Diana. He did not look at the people booing. He walked with the level-headed, unsurprised quality of a man who had been here before and knew that the crowd's anger was not about him, that it was about a flight and a Friday night and a system of plans that had been disrupted, and that it needed an object, and he was visible, and that none of this was about justice. He found the corner near the window. Gate B12. The same seat he had sat in before boarding. He sat down. He looked across the terminal at Diana. She was still performing. Her hands were moving. Her voice was carrying. She was now describing to a growing audience the details of her removal from the aircraft in terms that bore an approximately 40% resemblance to what had been recorded on 4 separate devices. Near the customer service desk, Caitlin Moore was being targeted. Diana had moved there with 3 of her acquired audience in tow, and she was now addressing Caitlin directly, leaning across the counter, her voice carrying the specific frequency of a woman who has decided that the person behind the desk is the most accessible representative of the entity that has wronged her. "I want a first-class booking on the next available flight," Diana was saying. "Not business, first class. And I want vouchers for the inconvenience I have experienced tonight. And I want the name of your supervisor and your supervisor's supervisor, and I want to know who I call to file a formal complaint against Captain Holt and the 2 men in first class who—" Caitlin looked like she was trying not to cry. She was 26 years old and had been on shift since noon, and she had until 40 minutes ago believed that the worst part of her evening was over. She was a person who genuinely liked her job, who had a gift for being kind to people under pressure, and who was now absorbing the full force of Diana Hartwell's displaced fury with nothing between her and it but a customer service counter and 6 weeks of training. Marcus watched this for 30 seconds. He looked down at his phone. It was ringing. Rick Owens, CEO of the airline, calling back. Marcus answered. "Marcus." Rick Owens said, his voice carrying the specific quality of a man who has received a report he was not expecting and has not yet decided how to feel about it. I just got the situation report from my VP of Operations. Flight 774 is down. You're at JFK. You're supposed to be in London for the signing in 10 hours. If you miss that signing, the investors might walk, Marcus said. I know, Rick. I'm standing in Terminal 4. The flight was canceled because a passenger blocked my seat, assaulted your crew, kicked a law enforcement officer, and delayed the departure until your pilots exceeded their duty hours. Those are the facts. A long exhale. I'm so sorry, Marcus. Give me 10 minutes. I'll have a private jet prepped at Teterboro. No, Marcus said. Silence on the line. I'm not taking a private jet, Marcus said. His eyes were still on Caitlin behind the desk, still on Diana, still on the calculation being performed in his head behind an expression that revealed none of it. I want to solve this here. For everyone. Rick, I need you to tell me something. Do you know a woman named Diana Hartwell? The narration steps back one more time. Not as far this time. 12 years back. Atlanta. An afternoon in November with the sky the pale high blue of a city that does not get enough cold weather to be good at winter. Marcus Webb was 31 and wearing a navy suit he had bought the week before a real suit. Not a good shirt ironed at 5 a.m., but an actual suit from an actual tailor because he had reached the age and the income where clothes could finally say what he needed them to say. He carried a leather portfolio. He had a 2:30 meeting with Gerald Barton, the managing director of Barton Venture Partners, a firm that had invested in 17 logistics and supply chain companies in the previous 4 years, every one of which had shown positive returns. Marcus had requested the meeting through a mutual contact. He had prepared for it for 6 weeks. He had a 12-page brief, a 3-year projection model, and a pitch that ran exactly 9 minutes. The building was glass and steel in Midtown Atlanta, the kind of building that understood itself to be important. The lobby was security monitored, the desk staffed by a guard in a Navy uniform. Marcus walked in. He gave his name. He said he had a 2:30 with Gerald Barton. The guard looked at him. He did not look at the appointment log immediately. He looked at Marcus first. The look lasted approximately 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds Marcus recognized with the bone-deep fluency he had developed over 31 years of living in his skin exactly what the guard was calculating. Not malice, not cruelty, just the silent, unconscious arithmetic of a man who had been trained by 1,000 small cultural lessons to read certain kinds of people as being in certain kinds of places. "Deliveries go to the loading dock," the guard said. Marcus stood at the lobby desk and breathed. "I have a meeting," he said, "with Gerald Barton. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm scheduled for 2:30. The guard looked at the book, found the name, looked at Marcus again. The specific look of a person whose assumption has been contradicted by a fact and who is taking a moment to reconcile the two. He picked up the phone. He called upstairs. He did not say Gerald Barton's 2:30 is here. He said in a voice that Marcus heard clearly, "There's a man in the lobby who says he has an appointment." Marcus stood at the desk and let the words pass through him. He was getting better at this, at letting the words pass rather than carry them. He was not entirely good at it yet. He was practicing. Gerald Barton came down personally. He was 60, white-haired, with the distracted energy of a man who was always thinking about 4 things simultaneously. When he saw Marcus waiting in the lobby, his face went through a sequence of expressions that ended in something that was halfway between apology and embarrassment. "Marcus, God, I'm sorry. Did you have trouble at the—" He gestured vaguely at the security desk. Marcus shook his hand. His grip was firm, his face composed. He said, "Don't apologize, Gerald. Just write the check." Gerald laughed. Not because it was entirely funny, but because the self-possession of it, the refusal to perform victimhood or demand acknowledgement, was so startling and so specific that laughter was the only available response. He wrote the check that afternoon. It was the largest single-seat investment Marcus had received to date. Marcus never forgot the guard's face, not with anger, not anymore. With something more like understanding the kind you earn by standing in a lobby for 3 minutes and deciding that you are still going to do the thing you came to do, regardless of what the building thinks of you when you arrive. He had stopped confirming what buildings expected of him a long time ago. Back in Terminal 4, Diana Hartwell was still screaming at Caitlin Moore. Rick Owens was waiting on the other end of the line, and Marcus Webb sitting in the corner seat by the gate. B12 window looked at Caitlin's face from 30 feet away and felt something that was not rage and not patience, but something between the two, a cold and clear determination. It was time. "Rick," Marcus said, "I need to ask you something before I explain what I want to do." "Go ahead," Rick Owens said. "The woman who caused tonight's cancellation. Her name is Diana Hartwell. Her husband is Paul Hartwell. He is the Senior Vice President of Client Relations at Crestline Partners." A pause, the length of a man checking mental files. "Crestline. They are one of our ground-fueling logistics contractors, mid-tier, critical infrastructure for 3 of our hub airports. I've met Paul Hartwell twice. Unremarkable. Why? Because 3 days ago, Marcus said Webb Meridian Group finalized the acquisition of Crestline's parent company." The line went quiet, not the quiet of a bad connection, the quiet of a man standing very still recalibrating. "Marcus." Rick's voice had changed frequency. Lower, slower. "You bought Ardent Holdings." "We did," Marcus said. Quietly. "Announcement was scheduled for next Thursday. Which means Paul Hartwell's employment contract runs through a holding company that is now wholly owned by Webb Meridian," Marcus said. "Which means that technically Paul Hartwell reports to a structure that I control. Which means that the woman currently screaming at your gate agent about trauma compensation is married to a man who works for me." The silence this time was longer. "Marcus," Rick said carefully, "what are you going to do?" Marcus was watching Diana across the terminal. She had now escalated to placing her phone directly in Caitlin's face, presumably recording the performance of documentation as a threat. Caitlin had stopped fighting the tears. She was managing them with the quiet determination of someone who has decided that crying at work is not the end of the world if the alternative is breaking. "4 things," Marcus said. "In this order." "I'm listening." "First, authorize emergency commercial crew recovery for Flight 774, unintended. Your pilot's timed out, which means they need a rest waiver. If you authorize it and offer them triple pay to fly the route voluntarily, you may find that at least 4 of the 5 are willing. I will personally cover the cost of the triple pay from my corporate account. Get my 300 people to London." Rick inhaled. "Marcus, that's going to be significant, yes. I'm aware. Do it anyway." "Done," Rick said after a moment. "What's the second thing?" "Issue a lifetime ban on Diana Hartwell. Immediate effect. All Webb Meridian Group affiliated airlines and your network partners. I'd like that in writing before I leave this terminal." "Done." "Third." Marcus stood up. He began walking, not toward Diana directly, but in that direction with the measured, unhurried pace of a man who knows that where he is going cannot be rushed. "Draft an email from your office to Paul Hartwell at Crestline Partners. Subject line personnel review conduct matter. Copy me. Do not elaborate in the email. Just the subject line, the date, and your office's contact details. The content will explain itself." Rick was quiet for a moment. "You're going to let the implication do the work." "The implication is the work," Marcus said. "And the 4th thing, Rick. This one is less official." "Tell me." Paul Hartwell's wife is currently shouting at a 26-year-old gate agent who checked me in tonight and asked how my shift was going and meant it. That agent's name is Caitlin Moore. Whatever process your HR team runs for the aftermath of tonight, I want Caitlin Moore's name in it. Not for punishment, for recognition. She has been standing at that desk since noon, and she is still standing. Rick was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had a different quality than when the conversation had started, something warmer and more careful. Marcus, I'm sorry tonight happened. Tonight happened, Marcus said. It happens. What we do after it is what matters. Start the crew authorization now. I'll handle the rest from here. He hung up. He was 15 feet from the customer service desk. Diana's voice was carrying over the ambient noise of the terminal with the penetrating clarity of someone who has spent a lifetime making sure they are heard. And I want it in writing. I want formal documentation that this airline acknowledges its failure to protect a paying passenger from harassment, and I want the name of the individual in 1A so that my lawyer can... Mrs. Hartwell, Marcus said. He said it at a normal, conversational volume. He did not need to raise it. There was something in the quality of his voice had always been something in it that rooms tended to quiet for. This room quieted. Diana turned. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who has decided she is the protagonist and has encountered the antagonist, which he recognized was also a fiction she was telling herself about the structure of the night. You have the nerve, she started, to come over here after what you call your husband, Marcus said. She stopped. Call Paul, he said. Put him on speaker. He should be part of this conversation. Diana's expression shifted through several configurations in under 2 seconds. She landed on contempt, which was her most reliable posture. I am going to have you arrested, she said. I am going to have every single person involved in what happened tonight. Diana. He said her name for the first time, quietly. Call Paul. The crowd that Diana had gathered earlier had not dispersed. They had followed her to the customer service desk because the unresolved drama of the evening still held them, and a crowd that has been assembled by a performance tends to stay for the ending. They were watching now approximately 20 people in a loose semicircle along with Noah Briggs, who had never fully put his phone away, and Margaret Ellis, who had arrived from the jet bridge 3 minutes ago and positioned herself near the edge of the crowd with her book tucked under her arm. Diana looked at the crowd. She understood in the way she had always understood audiences that they were not entirely hers right now. She had been trying to win them back with the Caitlin confrontation, and it had not been working in the way she needed. She picked up her phone. She dialed. She put it on speaker with the particular deliberateness of someone demonstrating power, the gesture of a woman who knows her husband and expects his voice to end arguments. The phone rang twice. Diana. Paul Hartwell's voice came through the speaker, and it was not the voice of a man who was about to end an argument. It was the voice of a man who had been staring at an email for the last 8 minutes and who had realized somewhere in the reading of it that the specific shape of disaster he had long feared was taking form. Paul, Diana said, I have been assaulted. I have been thrown off a plane. The airline canceled the flight because of some man, and now they refuse to rebook me in first class. Tell them who you are. Diana. A pause that had architecture in it, the architecture of a decision being made in real time. Stop talking. Stop talking right now. Diana blinked. What? Are you at JFK? Are you standing near a man named Marcus Webb? The crowd heard it. Several people straightened. Diana looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Diana. He raised one hand in a small, precise wave. Cold, controlled, entirely without cruelty, and entirely without warmth. Who is he? Diana said, and her voice had lost something, some fundamental certainty that had been in it for the entire evening, and without it the voice sounded smaller. How do you know his name? Because, Paul said, and the words came through the speaker into the terminal, heard by 20 people and 1 live stream. and the particular ringing clarity of a man who has understood exactly how bad this is. I just received an email from the CEO of the airline, and he CC'd the name on the document that arrived on my desk 3 days ago saying that the holding company that owns Crestline Partners has been acquired. A pause. Diana. Marcus Webb owns the company that owns my company. He is my employer's employer. And the email I just received says that if personnel changes are not made at Crestline by Monday, the entire Crestline logistics contract is under review. Diana. Do you understand what I am saying to you? You are going to cost me my job. You may be costing me everything. The terminal was silent, the specific silence of a crowd that has watched a person reach for a weapon and find it pointed at themselves. Diana lowered the phone from her ear. She looked at Marcus. The blood did not drain from her face. It evaporated. Pause here for just a moment. 20 people standing in a terminal. A phone call on speaker. A voice from 3 states away explaining in real time that the woman who had called him to confirm her power had instead confirmed her destruction. If you've ever seen someone reach for the thing they thought would protect them, and watch it become the thing that finished them, you know the particular quality of silence that filled Terminal 4 at JFK in that moment. Drop a comment if you already see where this is going, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now, because what happens next is the part that stays with you. Diana Hartwell was standing in Terminal 4 with her phone in her hand and her husband's voice still in the air and 20 people watching her understand something that could not be ununderstood. Marcus Webb had not moved. He stood 4 feet from her, his carry-on in his left hand, his right hand at his side, his face wearing the expression he had been wearing for 3 hours, which was not satisfaction and not triumph, and not the performed calm of a man suppressing something louder. It was simply composure, the real kind, the kind that does not need an audience and does not change when the audience looks. "Paul," Marcus said to the phone that was still on speaker in Diana's loosening hand. "This is Marcus Webb." On the other end, a sharp intake of breath. "Mr. Webb, sir, please. She's not well. I don't know what happened tonight. I apologize on behalf of both of us. Please don't pull the Crestline contract. We have 240 employees. The families, the operations." "The contract is under review," Marcus said. "That is the accurate description of its current status. I would recommend focusing on the parts of that review that are within your control." Yes, sir, of course." "Yes, sir, Marcus looked at Diana. "Right now, your wife is holding up Caitlin Moore, a gate agent who has been on shift for 9 hours and who did not cause any of tonight's events and should not be absorbing their consequences. I suggest you tell Diana to leave the airport." There was a long, quiet moment on Paul Hartwell's end of the call. Then his voice strained with a specific desperate authority that a man uses when he has run out of every other option. "Diana, get out of there. Get in a car and come home. Do not say another word to anyone. Do you hear me?" Diana stared at Marcus. The arrogance was gone. Not diminished, not softened. Gone. The way a fire goes when you cut off the oxygen, leaving nothing but the structural outline of where the flame used to be. She looked at the 20 people watching her. She looked at Noah's phone. She looked at Caitlin behind the counter, who had stopped crying and was now watching with the careful, exhausted expression of someone witnessing something they will spend years thinking about. She looked at Margaret Ellis at the edge of the crowd, who was watching with the patient attention of someone who has waited a long time for a particular kind of lesson to reach its conclusion. And she looked at Marcus one last time. "You planned this," she said. Her voice was very small. "I came to JFK to catch a flight," he said. "That's all I planned." A beat. "You didn't know who I was," she said, and she meant it as an accusation, but it landed in the air as something else entirely. A confession, an admission of what the entire evening had been about, that she had looked at a man and measured him against an expectation and found him insufficient, and the insufficiency had been entirely in the measurement. "No," Marcus said. "I didn't know who you were. That wasn't the problem." He paused. "The problem is that you didn't know who I was and you decided it didn't matter." The crowd heard it, fully cleanly in the suspended silence of a terminal at 8:15 on a July Friday night. Then someone from somewhere in the back of the gathered audience said, "Walk of shame." And the crowd which had booed Marcus 40 minutes ago, which had redirected their frustration at him and called him the problem, and told him he should have just sat somewhere else, turned as a single organism toward Diana Hartwell with the decisive collective clarity of a room that has finally understood what it was looking at. They didn't boo her. They were quieter than that. They stepped back from her. They turned their bodies slightly away from her. They gave her, in the specific social language of a crowd, withdrawing approval, a radius of space that felt like the loneliest distance in the world. Diana grabbed her tote bags. She didn't look at Caitlin. She didn't look at Marcus. She turned and she moved fast, faster than she had moved all evening, her heels clicking in the accelerating rhythm of a woman who has understood that there is no version of staying in this room that ends well. The crowd watched her go. Marcus turned to Caitlin Moore. Caitlin, who had been behind this counter for 9 hours, who had asked nobody for recognition and received very little of it, and who was now looking at Marcus with an expression that was trying to be professional and failing in the most human possible direction. "The crew has been authorized," he said. "Triple pay. Emergency recovery waiver. You should have a message from HQ in approximately 90 seconds. Caitlin looked at her screen, then looked at him, then looked at her screen again. "Mr. Webb," she said, and her voice cracked on the second word in the way voices crack when they have been held steady for a long time, and someone does something unexpected with kindness. "What's the flight status?" he said gently. She took a breath. She looked at her screen. The message from HQ had arrived. Authorization code Platinum Recovery. She reached for the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen." Caitlin's voice went out over the terminal PA, and it was not the practiced, steady voice of an airline announcement. It was a real voice, a slightly unsteady one, a voice belonging to a person who had just been handed something unexpected and was choosing to use it with care. "Thanks to Mr. Webb, Flight 774 to London Heathrow has been reinstated. We will begin boarding in 45 minutes. Gates agents will be available at the counter for any rebooking assistance needed." She set down the microphone. For 3 seconds, the terminal was still. Then it was not. The applause started at the back of the gathered crowd and moved forward, not like the polite applause of a performance, but like the applause of people who have been waiting for hours in an airport and have been given something real to feel. It rolled through the gate area and spread into the adjacent seating and became something large and warm and completely without irony. Several people clapped Marcus on the back as they passed. He accepted it without performance, nodding, saying nothing, not converting the moment into anything it did not need to be. The man from business class who had told Marcus that he should have just sat somewhere else pushed through the thinning crowd and stopped in front of him. He was somewhere in his 40s, wearing a jacket with a tech company logo, and he had the specific expression of a person who needs to say something and knows it and is not finding it easy. "Hey," he said. "Listen, I didn't know. What you did just now, paying for the crew, I was wrong. I said the wrong thing." Marcus looked at him. "You were frustrated," he said. "You needed somewhere to put it. I understand that." The man nodded, relieved in a way that made him look briefly much younger. "Just don't block the aisle," Marcus said. The man laughed, surprised, and walked away. Margaret Ellis appeared at Marcus's elbow. She was a small woman, silver-haired, with the kind of face that suggested decades of paying close attention to people. She touched his forearm briefly, once the gesture of someone who has decided that words are insufficient, but that silence is also insufficient. "Thank you," she said, "for not walking away." Marcus looked at her. The words arrived differently than he had expected, found something in him that most things in this terminal had not touched. "I've been walking away my whole life," he said. "I'm done with that." She nodded once. She picked up her hardback from the row of chairs beside them and moved toward the gate. Tomas Rivera came up the jet bridge off duty now, out of uniform, in a plain dark jacket and the specific relief of a man who has taken off the professional armor and is moving in his own skin. He walked straight to Marcus. He extended his hand. Marcus shook it. 11 years, Tomas said. "I've been doing this 11 years. "I know," Marcus said. "Tonight was the first time someone stood with us." Tomas held his grip for a moment. "Not for us with us. There's a difference." "Yes," Marcus said. "There is. I tried to hold the line. I wasn't sure I was going to make it." "You held it," Marcus said. "That was you. I was just standing in the aisle." Tomas shook his head, smiling in the way of someone who knows better and chooses not to argue. "Next time," Marcus said, "stand first. Don't wait for a passenger to back you up. Stand first. I'll back you up." Tomas looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded the deep, decided nod of a man who has been told the thing he needed to hear. He walked away toward the terminal exit. Marcus stood alone near the window. Outside, the ground crew had resumed their positions. The jet bridge was re-extending toward the aircraft. The Boeing 777 sat in the fading evening light, the engines cooling from the aborted departure. He looked at it. 45 minutes, then a seat, and silence, and whatever 6 hours of flight time over the Atlantic offered to a man who had just had a very long Tuesday. He was still tired. He was tired in the bone-deep, behind-the-eyes way that 31 hours and several airports and a first-class cabin dispute and a terminal cancellation produced in a human body, regardless of how composed the face above it had been the entire time. But something else was there too, under the tired. Quieter than satisfaction, more specific than relief. He was done waiting in hallways. He was flying to London. The second boarding of Flight 774 was different from the first. There was a quality to it that airports rarely produce, a kind of collective gentleness, as though the 300 people settling into their seats had been reminded of something that the ordinary mechanics of travel tend to crowd out. People said "excuse me" and meant it. A man in business class helped a woman with her overhead bag without being asked. The boarding line moved in the cooperative rhythm of people who have recently been part of something and feel briefly the weight of that shared experience. Marcus boarded last. Not symbolically, practically. He had been the last one standing in the gate area, watching the line form and file through, and he had waited until the jet bridge was clear before walking down it. The silence of the empty bridge was its own reward, 30 seconds of corridor between the noise behind and the noise ahead. He stepped onto the plane. Tomas was not at the door. His shift was over. The flight attendant who greeted Marcus was someone he hadn't met before, a young woman in her late 20s who scanned his boarding pass, registered his name, and said, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Webb," in the professional tone of someone who had been told by a colleague that this passenger was worth welcoming. Marcus thanked her and turned left into first class. Seat 1A was exactly as it should have been, slightly reclined. The pillow in the corner, the leather cool under his hand when he set his carry-on in the overhead bin and lowered himself into the seat. The orange bag was gone. Somewhere in an evidence room in Terminal 4, locked with the rest of the night's administrative wreckage. The seat was just a seat. He sat in it. After a moment, the other flight attendant, a young man named Ryan, appeared at his elbow with a glass of sparkling water. Marcus raised an eyebrow. He had not ordered. "Tomas left a note for the crew before he went off shift," Ryan said. Sparkling water, no ice before takeoff. Marcus looked at the glass. Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile and not quite anything else. He took the water. "Thank you," he said. "He also said to tell you." Ryan paused, consulting mental notes. "He said to tell you that the next time he stands first, he'll do it better." Marcus nodded, slowly. He looked out the oval window at the tarmac, the ground crew moving in the last of the evening light, the city beyond the airport fence with its million-lit windows. He opened his notebook. He did not write anything. He held the pen, and he looked at the page that was blank from earlier in the evening from the 3 lines he had written at gate B12 before boarding. The 3 lines were still there, unchanged, exactly as he had left them, as if everything that had happened between writing them and returning to them had been a very long trip around the outside of a building, and he had come back to the same door he had left through. He closed the notebook. He thought about Tomas holding the line for 11 years, about Caitlin behind the counter for 9 hours, about Sophia, 22 years old, recording from a doorway because she understood what she was seeing and decided that understanding it was not enough, about Margaret Ellis, 64, putting her book down with the deliberateness of a woman who had decided to be a witness. They were always there. The decent people. In every room, on every side of every moment, the people who had seen the right thing and needed someone to make it safe enough to stand next to it. Sometimes what it took was just a man standing in an aisle, not moving, not performing, not providing the path of least resistance. Sometimes it took nothing more than refusing to leave. The engines began to spin. The sound was deep and regular. The sound of vast mechanical purpose, of tons of engineering and fuel and physics aligning in the service of getting things from one place to another. Marcus leaned back. He was asleep before the wheels left the ground. Outside the oval window, JFK's runway lights made lines in the darkness, and the Boeing 777 lifted with the gathered momentum of everything that had happened to bring it here, the delay, the drama, the cancellation, the reinstatement, and climbed into the July night toward the dark Atlantic, carrying 300 people who were finally going where they had intended to go. One of them was sleeping. While Marcus slept at 38,000 feet, the world below woke up. It began with Noah Briggs. He had spent the delay and the second boarding editing on his phone, stitching together the 4 hours of footage with the precision of someone who has done this enough times to know that the story tells itself if you find the sequence. He posted it at 9:47 p.m. with a caption that was by his own standards restrained CEO of entitlement versus the actual CEO. Watch until the end for the instant karma. No hashtags, no tagging. He trusted the algorithm. The algorithm did not disappoint. By midnight, the video had 800,000 views. By 1 a.m., another user had stitched Noah's footage with Sophia Reyes's 14-minute recording, the 2 angles creating a complete picture of the cabin confrontation that no single viewpoint had captured alone. The compiled version uploaded under the title The Bag Lady of Flight 774 gained 3 million views in under 2 hours. The comment section was not a war zone. That was the unusual thing. Comment sections for this kind of video were typically the internet at its worst, faction-driven point, scoring the grievance tournament of people who had arrived to fight rather than witness. This one was different. For once, the current was flowing in one direction. She said, "People like him. On camera, with 20 witnesses. I cannot." The way he never raised his voice. Not once in 4 hours. That is the composure of someone who has been through this before and decided a long time ago how to handle it. Wait. I recognize that name. Marcus Webb. Webb Meridian. He literally just acquired the company that employs her husband. This is not karma. This is architecture. The gate agent, the flight attendant, the woman in row 3, every one of them stepped up when it counted. That cabin full of strangers did something right. Sophia's footage is 14 minutes of the clearest documentation of how these moments actually work. Someone in aviation training needs to use this. By 2 a.m., the hashtag #BagLady was #1 in the United States on X, formerly Twitter, and #3 in the United Kingdom. Travel journalists had identified Gate B14 and were calling JFK's PR office at an hour when nobody was staffed to answer. Crestline Partners' website received so much traffic that it crashed at 1:23 a.m. and remained down until morning. The homepage, which had featured a photo of the executive team, was archived by 17 different users before it went dark. Paul Hartwell's professional headshot in the third row from the left. Third from the right. Paul Hartwell, who had not slept, who had been on the phone with his lawyer since 9 p.m., who had refreshed the Crestline homepage 4 times in the last hour, saw the crash notification on his laptop and put his head in his hands. He had tried to call Diana twice. She had not answered. She was either sleeping or more likely watching the same videos he was watching and understanding in the specific silence of a person alone at 2 a.m. watching themselves become the Internet's current most available example of a particular kind of failure. Exactly how much had been lost in a single evening? In the analytics dashboard of Noah's channel, which he had left open on his laptop on the seat tray of Flight 774's economy class, where he had upgraded from business to coach for the extra legroom he preferred on long hauls. The view counter was spinning. He looked at it for a moment. Then he put on his headphones and went to sleep. 3 rows ahead in first class, Marcus Webb slept through all of it. The viral moment that would become a case study in behavioral training programs in journalism school curricula, in the inevitable think pieces about dignity and public space and who gets to decide who belongs where. He slept through the first wave of press requests that landed in his publicist Selena Hart's inbox. He slept through the moment the Daily Mail got the story, and the moment the New York Times picked it up, and the moment a senator quoted it in a tweet. He slept through the #1 trending hashtag and the 40 million views and the clip of Diana's face when her husband's voice came through the speaker, which had been slowed down and scored to classical music and remixed into a dozen different formats. He slept through all of it. The Boeing 777 climbed and steadied and flew west to east across the dark Atlantic, carrying its cargo of sleeping travelers and their complicated ordinary human weight, their missed dinners and rearranged plans, and the residue of an evening that had been for most of them the most unusual Tuesday they would have for years. Below, the ocean was dark and complete and entirely indifferent to hashtags. Above 38,000 feet, in the uninterrupted silence of altitude, one man slept in seat 1. And the engines ran and the world kept spinning its stories without him. The wheels of Flight 774 touched the runway at Heathrow Terminal 3 at 7:58 a.m., British summertime. Marcus woke up 12 minutes before landing, which was what he always did, some internal mechanism set, to allow for the specific luxury of watching a city appear beneath the clouds before the wheels reached it. He had done this in Dubai and Singapore and Frankfurt and Nairobi and a dozen other cities, this quiet ritual of the descent, the world reassembling itself from abstraction into geography. London was gray and luminous, the particular silver of an early morning, with low cloud cover the Thames visible as a dark thread through the city below, and he watched it approach through the oval window with the settled calm of a man who had slept for 6 hours and was ready for whatever the next 24 required. He was for 3 minutes in the specific peace of a man between things. Not yet arrived. No longer in the airport, just in the air watching a city get larger. Then the wheels touched. Ryan, the flight attendant, stopped by his seat as passengers began to stand. "Safe travels, Mr. Webb." "Thank you," Marcus said. "Your crew ran a smooth flight." "We had a good crew," Ryan said. He paused. "Tomas is good, in case you didn't know." "I know," Marcus said. He deplaned, The jet bridge at Heathrow was cool and quiet. At the end of it, a woman stood waiting with the particular attentiveness of someone who has been watching the arrivals gate for several minutes. She was his London operations coordinator, Emma Boyle, who was there to escort him to the car. "Mr. Webb?" Emma said. "Welcome to London." "Thank you, Emma." "I should warn you," she said, and her voice had the specific quality of someone delivering information that they know will not be welcome, "that there are 3 journalists waiting near the customs hall. I believe they've been there since about 5 a.m. Marcus reached into his jacket and turned his phone on. It vibrated for 45 continuous seconds without stopping. He looked at the screen. 49 missed calls, 93 text messages, 17 news alerts. His PR lead, Selena Hart, had called 11 times. Unknown numbers from New York area codes. An email from his board chair. He opened the news app. The Daily Mail headline read, "Air Rage exclusive wife of exec kicks cop blocks. CEO's seat gets flight canceled. Internet erupts." Beneath it, a screenshot of Diana's face at the moment she had thrown the orange bag into the aisle, caught in Noah Briggs's footage at the precise frame that made her look most like what she had been in that moment, and a photograph of Marcus that the Mail had pulled from the Forbes cover, him standing in an open-plan office looking directly at the camera with the composed authority of a man who knew he was being photographed and had decided not to perform for it. The contrast between the 2 images was doing significant editorial work. His phone rang. Selena Hart. "Damien," she said, and then corrected herself immediately. "Marcus, sorry. You're trending above the Prime Minister. I need you to know that before you walk into that customs hall, because there are 4 cameras and I counted them." "I'm not speaking to press," Marcus said. "I know, but Diana Hartwell is. She did wake up America via Zoom from her living room 40 minutes ago. She is claiming you verbally abused her before the cameras started rolling. She says you used your position to have her illegally detained. She is suing you personally for $50 million. Emotional distress, defamation, and loss of reputation." Marcus had been moving through the jet bridge. He stopped. 1 beat. "Good," he said. Selena was quiet for a moment. "Good. It means she files papers. It means there's a deposition. It means Sophia Reyes's 14 minutes of audio and video goes into a formal record." He started walking again. "Tell Catherine Voss to clear her calendar. We're countersuing." "Marcus, if we countersue, we destroy her." "She walked onto a plane," he said, and put her bag in a man's seat because she looked at him and decided he was lesser. She called a flight attendant a waiter with wings in front of a cabin full of witnesses. She kicked a police officer. She tried to redirect the anger of 300 strangers onto the one person in the terminal who had done nothing wrong. He reached the customs hall doors. Through the glass, he could see the cameras, just as Emma had said, positioned near the exit. "I'm not destroying her, Selena. I'm just making sure everything she did is on record. She did the destroying herself." Through the glass door, the morning light of a London summer fell across the terminal in long, low bars. The cameras were there. The journalists were watching the door. Marcus straightened his jacket. He was wearing the same charcoal suit he had worn onto the plane at JFK. It was still immaculate. He had that skill, the ability to wear fabric for 18 hours across 3 time zones, and emerge from it as though freshly dressed, which his tailor had once attributed to the quality of the cloth, and which Marcus privately attributed to something less purchasable. He took a breath. He pushed open the door. The cameras turned toward him. The journalists called his name. 2 of them moved forward. His security detail, 2 men he had arranged for the London trip, materialized from the waiting area and flanked him efficiently without drama. He walked, head level, pace measured. The look on his face was the same look it had been for the entire evening. He got into the black car waiting at the curb. The door closed behind him. He looked out at the gray London morning as the car pulled away from the terminal. "Catherine," he said, dialing. "Get ready." The conference room at Webb Meridian's London offices was on the 14th floor overlooking the Thames. and it held at that moment the specific atmospheric quality of a room in which significant things were about to be decided. 14 people sat around the glass table. 4 more were present via screen. Rick Owens, CEO of the airline, appeared on the central monitor with the slightly flattened quality of a man who had not slept and had been in front of a camera for 30 minutes already this morning. On the secondary screen, arranged in a split view, sat the board of Crestline Partners, and at the end of the table, still in his charcoal suit with a cup of black coffee and no visible evidence of having traveled through the night, sat Marcus Webb. On the wall behind the main screen, Diana Hartwell's Wake Up America interview played on mute. Her face was animated. Her hands were moving. She was clearly making a compelling case to someone. The sound-off version was, if anything, more illuminating than the version with audio, the pure performance of it stripped of its verbal content. The gestures too large, the expression cycling too fast through its registers, the practiced tremor in the lip appearing and disappearing with the regularity of something that had been practiced. Marcus looked at it for a moment, then turned to the room. "We have a liability," he said. "Let's address it efficiently." He slid a folder to the center of the table. Catherine Voss, his litigator, distributed copies to each board member. On the screen, Crestline's chairman Barrett Cole received a digital version from his assistant and opened it on his tablet. The folder contained Paul Hartwell's expense records for the previous 18 months. 63 pages, annotated. Barrett Cole went very still. "The Hermes bag that was thrown onto the floor of my seat on Flight 774, Marcus said, was charged to a Crestline corporate account under the line item Client Entertainment. The first-class tickets that Diana Hartwell has been using for the past 22 months on this airline and 3 others were charged to the same account under various iterations of business travel, a total of 34 first-class bookings over 18 months. Not Paul Hartwell's travel, his wife's." The room was quiet. "That is misappropriation of company funds," Catherine Voss said for the benefit of the Crestline board. "It is fraud. It has been occurring over a documented period of 18 months, and it was until last night entirely unreported because the person doing it was the spouse of the SVP who approved the expense categories." Barrett Cole looked at the document. He looked at the document for a long time. "We had no idea," he said. "I know," Marcus said, "which is why this is a conversation and not a prosecution, at this stage." He set down his coffee. 3 things. First, Crestline issues a public statement today. Paul Hartwell is terminated for cause: misappropriation of company funds and gross misconduct. His unvested stock options are canceled. His pension is voided. The statement should be factual, brief, and complete. No room for ambiguity about why he is leaving. Barrett nodded. He had the expression of a man making a rapid peace with a situation that had been decided before he arrived. Second, the airline files a civil suit against Diana Hartwell for the direct costs of last night's cancellation. Flight fuel costs, crew overtime, emergency crew authorization, rebooking fees for 300 passengers and their connecting arrangements, and all associated operational costs. Marcus looked at Rick Owens on the screen. "What is the estimated total?" Rick checked a paper in front of him. "We're looking at approximately $420,000. Sue for $500,000, Marcus said. "And attach a lien to the primary residence in Greenwich as security against payment. I want no scenario in which she treats the suit as a cost of doing business that can be quietly settled and forgotten." Rick wrote something down. "Third Sophia Reyes recording. The full 14 minutes unedited released to the press." He paused. Not excerpts, not selected clips. All of it. The audio of Diana calling Tomas Rivera a waiter with wings. The audio of people like him. The footage of her throwing the bag. The footage of the removal. Everything. Selena Hart, his PR lead who had flown overnight from New York and was sitting at the far end of the table with a coffee and the expression of someone who has been managing public consequences for 15 years and has not yet seen this specific configuration, spoke carefully. Marcus, if we release the full 14 minutes, there is no recovery. She will not work. She will not be welcome in the circles she has spent her life in. The social consequences alone. She put her bag in a man's seat, Marcus said, because she looked at him and decided he was worth less than the bag. He stood. He walked to the window. The Thames was visible below gray and deliberate, moving in the direction it always moved, regardless of what happened on its banks. She called a professional who has given 11 years of his life to that job a waiter with wings in front of a cabin full of witnesses because he asked her to comply with a reasonable instruction. She performed victimhood in front of 20 cameras to redirect the anger of 300 people onto the person in the terminal who had done nothing wrong. He turned back to the room. I am not releasing that footage to punish her, Selena. I am releasing it because it is a complete and accurate record of what happened, and because the people in that cabin, Tomas, Sophia, Caitlin, the passengers who stood up, the ones who turned their bodies and decided to be witnesses, they deserve to have what they witnessed confirmed. They deserve to know that it was seen. The room was still. She destroyed herself when she put her bag in his seat. Catherine Voss said to no one in particular, as though the sentence had been forming in her for the entire meeting. She did, Marcus said. I'm just turning on the lights. Barrett Cole straightened. What do you need from Crestline today? The statement by 10 a.m. local time, Marcus said. And a full audit of Paul Hartwell's expense accounts going back 3 years. I want to know the complete scope before we are asked about it. Done. Marcus looked at Rick on the screen. The airline's statement should be separate from Crestline's. 2 different entities, 2 different reasons, same day. Don't let it look coordinated even though it is. Let the facts do the sequencing. Rick nodded. One more thing, Marcus said. He pulled a card from his jacket pocket. He slid it to Barrett Cole. Caitlin Moore, gate agent at JFK Terminal 4, assigned to the B gates. When the operational review of last night's events is complete, I want her name recognized formally. She spent 9 hours on shift. She was targeted by a passenger who should never have been in that terminal. She held herself together. That kind of person is an asset. Barrett Cole took the card. He looked at it. He nodded. Marcus picked up his briefcase. We have a signing at 9 a.m., he said. Let's not be late. He walked to the door. At the threshold, he paused without turning. On the wall behind him, Diana Hartwell was still speaking on mute. Her hands moving her expression, cycling, making her case to a morning show host who had already heard the full recording. Anything else? He said. Nobody answered. He walked out. The living room of the Hartwell home in Greenwich, Connecticut, had a view of a garden that in July was at its best, green and ordered, and the specific kind of expensive that does not announce itself. At 7:15 a.m. East Coast time, Diana Hartwell sat in front of her laptop in the room's best chair, her hair newly arranged, her makeup applied with the careful effort of someone reconstructing an appearance rather than maintaining one. Paul had not slept in the bedroom. She did not know where he had slept. She had been awake for 22 hours. She felt underneath the makeup and the posture and the prepared sentences a specific kind of fragile that she had not felt before and did not have language for. The viral videos were real. The comments were real. The number of people who had seen her in that cabin and formed an opinion and expressed it in language that was direct and specific and, in some cases, very cruel, was a real and verifiable quantity that kept increasing every time she refreshed the page. But she was not as the people who knew her could have predicted going to be quiet. The Zoom call connected. The Wake Up America set appeared on her screen bright and professional, and in the host's seat was Diane Barrow, 51, with the specific watchfulness of a journalist who has read the briefing and has questions that do not appear in it. "Patricia," Diane said, "thank you for joining us." "Diana," Diana said. "Of course." "Diana, you've seen the videos that are circulating. You're here to give your side of the story." "I am," Diana said. She had prepared for this. She had prepared the tremor in her voice and the careful confusion in her expression and the specific way she would describe being frightened by a man who had never raised his voice. She had prepared the part about protecting her property and being misunderstood, and the crew ganging up on her and the airport being chaotic, and her health not being good lately and the stress of the whole situation. "Go ahead," Diane said. "What the videos don't show," Diana began, and her voice was exactly as she had calibrated it, "is what happened before the cameras came out. When that man first boarded, his energy was immediately aggressive. He loomed over me. He made comments about my appearance before he said anything about the seat. I was frightened. I was a woman alone on an international flight, and I was frightened, and nobody was helping me." Diane Barrow looked at her for a moment. "Diana, we have a statement from the airline. They say that you refused 3 direct orders from the flight crew and that you kicked a police officer during your removal. There is body cam footage of the kick that has also been circulating." Diana's prepared tremor flickered. "That footage is selectively edited. I was defending myself. The officer grabbed my arm without warning." "The officer had asked you to come voluntarily 3 times before making physical contact," Diane said. "That is on the body cam footage." "I was frightened," Diana said. "I was having a physical response to the stress." "And the comments you made to the flight attendant." Diane picked up a paper. "I'm quoting from audio. 'You are a waiter with wings,' said to a man named Tomas Rivera, who has been flying for 11 years. Diana opened her mouth, closed it. "And the phrase, 'people like him,'" Diane continued, "used to describe Mr. Webb, who was standing in the aisle asking for the seat he had paid for." "I was talking about his behavior," Diana said. "I was not implying anything about—" "People like him," Diane said again quietly. "In the context of a black man asking a white woman to move her bag from his seat." "What were you implying, Diana?" "I am not a racist," Diana said, and her voice had lost the tremor because the tremor required control and control was going. "I have friends who are. I know people I donate to. I have a record of this as a smear campaign. He is a billionaire. He is paying people to. He hasn't made a public statement," Diane said. "He landed at Heathrow 2 hours ago and hasn't spoken to press. He's behind the whole thing," Diana said, louder now. "This entire narrative is manufactured. I am the victim here. I was harassed and then publicly humiliated, and now my life is—" She stopped. The word life had come out with more truth in it than she had intended. More of the actual weight of what was waiting for her on the other side of this broadcast. The videos, the comments, the lawyers, the email on Paul's laptop, the house, all of it. The word life had let some of that weight through. Diane Barrow saw it. She was experienced enough not to press. The broadcast ended 3 minutes later. Within 40 minutes, the clip of Diana saying smear campaign had been set to 3 different music tracks and posted on TikTok by 4 different accounts. The version with the orchestral swell gained 2 million views before noon. In the kitchen, Paul Hartwell heard the Zoom call end. He did not go into the living room. He had a bag packed in the hallway. He had a sister in Florida who had told him he could come. He picked up the bag. He left without saying anything. 3 months later, snow was falling on Manhattan. It came down in the specific way of November snow in the city, not the generous accumulation of a real storm, but the thin, provisional kind, the kind that covered the pavement in a gray slush within an hour of landing, as though winter were making a point rather than a commitment. Through the glass walls of the conference room on the 41st floor of a law firm on 6th Avenue, the snow made the city look both beautiful and indifferent, which was Marcus had always thought the most accurate way to see it. He had arrived at 9 a.m. He was wearing a different suit today, charcoal again, because it was the suit that worked, and he had stopped varying things for the sake of variety. He had a coffee in a paper cup from the cart downstairs. Not the firm's coffee, because he liked the cart's coffee better, and had learned in his 40s that small specific preferences were worth honoring. He sat at one side of the long mahogany table. Across from him, Diana Hartwell sat in a gray wool sweater from a brand that did not have a visible logo. Her hair was its natural color at the roots now, a darker blonde shading toward gray, and it was pulled back in a practical bun rather than the rigid helmet it had been in July. She looked different. Not just older, though she did look older. She looked like a person from whom something structural had been removed, some internal scaffolding that had been, it turned out, not bone, but performance. She looked at the table rather than at Marcus when he sat down. Beside her sat Victor Nolan, her attorney who had taken the case on a contingency basis in July, when it looked like Diana Hartwell might be a compelling media figure with a sympathetic narrative. He now had the expression of a man reassessing every decision that had led him to this table. Catherine Voss sat beside Marcus. She had a binder that was 3 inches thick and a legal pad that was already covered in her precise, close handwriting. She had been preparing for this deposition for 11 weeks with the thoroughness of someone who considered preparation to be the only form of mercy she was inclined to offer. A videographer stood in the corner. "State your name for the record," Catherine said. "Diana Hartwell," Diana said. Her voice was quieter than it had been in July. It was not broken. She was not broken. But it was a different voice, one that had been through something and come out on the other side, knowing more about itself than it had wanted to. "Mrs. Hartwell, you are suing my client, Marcus Webb, for defamation, emotional distress, and loss of reputation, claiming that his actions on the evening of July 14th caused direct damage to your standing in your community, your marriage, and your professional and social life. Is that correct?" "Yes," Diana said. "And you are claiming damages of $50 million. "Yes." Catherine opened the binder. "Let's look at the record." She worked through it methodically, page by page, with the patience of someone who has all day and knows it. The audio from Sophia Reyes's recording played through a speaker in the corner of the room, crisp and unambiguous. The body cam footage from the Port Authority officers projected on a screen at the end of the table. The expense records from Crestline Partners, now public record, following Paul Hartwell's termination and the subsequent audit. Each exhibit landed with its own weight. Diana denied things that the audio contradicted. She remembered things differently than the video showed. She described feelings that the footage did not support. Victor Nolan leaned over periodically and whispered, and each time he leaned over, Diana answered whatever was on the screen in a voice that had started cautious and was becoming progressively less controlled. Then Diana said, "You planned this." She said it in the middle of an answer to a question about the timeline of the evening, the non sequitur of someone who had been building toward a statement for the whole session. "He planned it. He knew who I was. He set a trap." Marcus had not spoken since confirming his own name at the opening. He spoke now. "I didn't know who you were," he said. Diana looked at him. It was the first time in the session she had looked at him directly. Something moved across her face, not quite recognition, not quite regret, but something in the territory of both that did not have a cleaner name. "You assumed that because you didn't know me," Marcus said, "I was nobody. And the only evidence you needed for that conclusion was how I was dressed and what I looked like. That was it. That was the whole calculation." "I was frightened," Diana said. of a man standing in an aisle," he said, "asking you to move a bag." Victor Nolan put his hand on Diana's arm. She pulled it away. "You took everything," she said, and now the voice was the voice of something genuine, stripped of its preparation, the actual weight of the July evening and its 3-month aftermath landing in one sentence. "My house, Paul, my friends. I can't go anywhere. I can't—" She stopped. "Mrs. Hartwell." Catherine said, her voice even and not unkind, "Let me tell you what is actually happening here today." She slid a document across the table. "You filed a lawsuit against my client for defamation and emotional distress. We are countersuing, not only for the direct costs of the airline cancellation, which have already been addressed in the civil suit, but for tortious interference." Victor Nolan straightened. "On what grounds?" "Your client's actions on July 14th caused a direct and documented disruption to a business relationship between Web Meridian Group and Crestline Partners, which resulted in the termination of a key personnel member under a contract that contained a morality clause applicable to immediate family members of executives. The cancellation of the Crestline logistics contract pending review and reputational damages to Web Meridian Group estimated at $12 million. Diana's hands were flat on the table. She was very still. "We will take the Greenwich House," Catherine said, not cruelly the way you state a coordinate, "as it has already been identified in the civil judgment as a lienable asset. We will take the Aspen property. We will take the investment portfolio, which your own financial disclosure shows has approximately $900,000 in remaining value after the existing judgments. And yes," Catherine paused, "we will take the Hermes bag, which was identified in your asset disclosure as personal property and is currently in police evidence." Victor Nolan was already leaning in to whisper. Diana did not pull away this time. She sat very still and listened. Then she said quietly to no one in particular, "I just wanted to keep my bag safe." She said it so quietly that the videographer barely caught it, but it was there on the record, and it was the most honest sentence she had spoken since July. Marcus stood. He buttoned his jacket. He picked up his coffee. He looked at Victor Nolan. 24 hours to withdraw your lawsuit and accept our terms on the countersuit. After that, we go to trial. And I will put every second of Sophia Reyes's 14 minutes on a screen in front of a jury, and I will let 12 ordinary people who have stood in lines and been looked through and been told to try the back entrance decide who the victim is." He walked toward the door. He was almost through it when Diana said, "I'm sorry." He stopped. He did not turn around immediately. He let the sentence stand on its own for a moment in the quiet of the conference room, with the snow falling beyond the glass and the city going about its indifferent business 41 floors below. He turned. Diana was looking at him. Her hands were in her lap. The gray sweater was simple, and she looked in this room without her armor, like a person rather than a performance, which was the most charitable thing the moment offered, and the most complicated. "I'm sorry," she said again. "For the seat. For all of it. Is that what you need to hear?" He looked at her for a moment. "You're not sorry you did it, Diana," he said. She opened her mouth. "You're sorry you picked the wrong seat." He opened the door and walked out. Behind him, the conference room was quiet. The videographer looked at his screen. The footage was clean. Victor Nolan closed his binder with a sound like a sentence ending. Catherine Voss made a single note on her legal pad. Outside the 41st floor windows, the November snow kept falling, covering the city in the thin, provisional white of a season that was just beginning. LaGuardia Airport's budget terminal was everything its name implied, and nothing more. The carpet was the specific shade of blue chosen by people who knew it would need to hide stains. The seats were molded plastic bolted to the floor in rows that suggested functionality rather than comfort. The departure board showed 15 delayed flights and no explanations. Diana Hartwell sat in one of those plastic seats with a worn duffel bag between her feet, and a beige jacket that had been washed too many times, and a ponytail because the helmet hair required products she no longer budgeted for. Nobody looked at her. This was still the part that was hardest. Not the apartment in Queens, which was small but adequate. Not the data entry job at the medical billing company, which was monotonous but steady, and which she had gotten because the hiring manager had never seen the videos. Not even the divorce which had been finalized in February, Paul having moved to Florida with someone he had apparently been seeing since the previous spring. What was hardest was the invisibility. She had been visible her entire life. Not always seen correctly, not always seen the way she wanted, but always registered, always noticed, always a presence that rooms adjusted to accommodate. Now she moved through rooms and nothing adjusted. She stood in lines and nobody moved. She boarded planes and no one offered help with the overhead bin. She was in Group 4. The gate agent called it in the monotone of a person who had made this announcement so many times it had become ambient noise. Group 4. Diana stood, pulled the duffel onto her shoulder, and joined the line. The bag was heavy. Her shoulder ached. The ache was real now, a chronic thing that came from stress and long hours and the specific physical cost of tension that has nowhere to go. The flight was to Fort Lauderdale. $89, non-refundable middle seat. Row 24. She boarded. She made her way down the aisle of the Airbus A320, which smelled of the specific combination of recycled air and compressed humanity that she had once experienced only in the way you experience background noise, barely perceptible through the cushioning of first class. She found row 24. A large man already occupied the window seat, spilling generously over the armrest. A teenager with headphones blocked the aisle seat. She said, "Excuse me," and meant it, and squeezed into the middle. The tray table pressed against her knees. She tried to fit the duffel bag under the seat in front of her. It was too full. She pushed. It went halfway. Her phone buzzed, a news alert. She almost let it pass, but the name in the headline was a name she could not scroll past. Marcus Webb launches Dignity in Transit Initiative, $5 million foundation to protect airline workers from passenger assault and harassment. She opened it. He was standing on a stage in the photograph beside Rick Owens beside the airline's senior operations team, with the expression she recognized from the Forbes cover and from a first-class cabin in July, the expression that did not perform anything. He looked rested and certain, and completely himself. The article detailed the foundation's scope: legal aid for flight attendants who had been assaulted, advocacy funds for gate agents facing harassment, an anonymous reporting system for bias incidents that bypassed the standard complaint process, a curriculum for bias recognition in crew training built partly from 14 minutes of clean audio and video footage taken by a junior flight attendant named Sophia Reyes on the evening of July 14th. She read to the end. The final paragraph. To launch fundraising for the foundation, Mr. Webb auctioned a single item at last night's gala. A Hermes Birkin bag faux orange, acquired via a bankruptcy liquidation proceeding following the legal judgment in Hartwell versus Webb et al. The bag sold for $47,000. 100% of proceeds go to the Dignity in Transit Fund. The anonymous buyer reportedly intends to use it as a gym bag. Diana stared at the screen. The bag. Her $5,000 bag, which she had placed on a seat in a first-class cabin because she had believed with the absolute certainty of someone who has never been asked to justify a belief that it had more right to that seat than the man who had paid for it. The bag that had been taken into evidence and returned to her in a paper bag 3 weeks after the incident, and that had been included in her asset disclosure and surrendered in the settlement because nothing was exempt. That bag was now a gym bag for someone richer than she had ever managed to become, and the money from its sale was helping the people she had called peasants. She stared at the screen until it went dark. One tear ran down her cheek and fell onto the beige jacket. She did not wipe it. She was too tired to wipe it. The plane pushed back from the gate. "Ma'am?" A flight attendant paused at her row, the voice professional and gentle. "Your bag needs to be fully stowed before takeoff. Could you push it all the way under the seat?" Diana looked up. The flight attendant was young, dark-haired, with the tired eyes of someone 4 hours into a shift. "Of course," Diana said. "I'm sorry." She kicked the bag under the seat. It disappeared into the darkness beneath the tray. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at the seat back in front of her. She closed her eyes. Tomas Rivera was named Lead Purser of the Year by the airline at their annual crew recognition ceremony in October, held in a hotel ballroom in Chicago that smelled of institutional carpet and genuine pride. He stood at the podium in his uniform, and he said in a voice that had been steady for 11 years on planes and was slightly less steady now that the award belonged to a cabin, that standing up was not something one person did. It was something a room decided together. He said there had been a passenger this past July who had made it easier to decide. Caitlin Moore was promoted to Gate Services Supervisor in September. She kept the HQ authorization message printed and framed on the wall of her new office, the one with the window, the one that looked out onto the B gates. Platinum Recovery, it read. She was 26 years old, and she was a supervisor with a window office, and she had gotten there by standing at a counter for 9 hours and not breaking. Sophia Reyes's footage became the foundation of a new bias recognition training module adopted by 3 major airlines and 2 aviation industry associations. The module was built without her name on it at her request because she said the footage should speak for itself. She was offered a role in the airline's operations review division in November, and she took it moving from the galley curtain to the conference room from witness to advocate. Margaret Ellis published an essay in a quarterly journal that was later reprinted in The Atlantic. She wrote about a first-class cabin and a man who had been asked to move before he had arrived, and had stood in an aisle with such composure that it had forced her in row 3 to ask herself what composure of that quality costs, and what the world asks of people in exchange for it. The essay ran to 4,000 words. It was shared 1.3 million times. Noah Briggs started a podcast about public accountability, public space, and the documented gap between what people believe they would do in difficult moments and what they actually do. It had 800,000 subscribers by the following spring. The first episode was called The Bag. 14 months after Flight 774. Marcus Webb was in a conference room in Lagos, Nigeria, 11 in the morning, his 3rd city in 5 days, looking at a projection map of West African supply routes that had inefficiencies in them that he could already see from across the room. His phone buzzed. A text from Adriana Cruz. "Tomas Rivera's award ceremony is tonight. He submitted your name to the thank you page of the ceremony program. I told him you'd want to know. He also asked if you might send a note." Marcus looked at the projection map. He looked at the city outside the window. This city he had never been to before, and that was already in the specific way of places that have real work in them starting to feel navigable. He put down the spreadsheet. He took out the notebook. The Leuchtturm, 1917 with the rubber band closure. He turned to a fresh page. He wrote 3 sentences in his small, careful handwriting. He took a photograph and sent it to Adriana. In a hotel ballroom in Chicago, Tomas Rivera was handed a printed card at the podium. He unfolded it. He read the 3 sentences. His voice, which had been steady in the first-class cabin of a 777 on an evening in July, and steady at the podium for the first 2 minutes of his speech, cracked on the last line. He finished the sentence anyway. He held the microphone. He breathed. The room applauded. "We do not see what the note said. That is between Tomas Rivera and the man who wrote it. Some things do not need witnesses. They just need to be true." Marcus Webb did not fly to London that July to change anything. He went to close a deal. He wanted a seat. He wanted 6 hours of sleep. He wanted the specific silence of altitude and the dark Atlantic below, and nothing that required anything from him. What he got instead was a bag on his seat, and a woman who looked at him and made a calculation in under 3 seconds, and a room full of people who had to decide quietly and quickly, and with cameras rolling which side of a line they were on. He did not give a speech. He did not demand acknowledgement. He stood in an aisle, and he did not move, and in not moving he made it possible for other people to stand too. That was all. That was everything. The only seat that was ever really in question that evening was never on the plane. It was the seat at the table. The seat in the room. The seat that gets taken from people before they arrive quietly and automatically by the weight of other people's assumptions. Marcus Webb has been taking that seat back his entire life, one room at a time, one aisle at a time, with the specific unhurried composure of a man who decided long ago that the hallway was not his address. If this story hit you somewhere, tap that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story about what happens when dignity refuses to be moved. Because the people who try to take your seat are counting on you to find somewhere else to sit. Don't find somewhere else. Sit down.